Okay, everybody. Noting the hour in the presence of a quorum, I call the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee to order. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting online may use ActonTV's YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com/ActonTV1. And just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. So, welcome to tonight's meeting. Our presentations, we'll have a couple of presentations, one on mathematics in our district, and the second of the FY24 budget presentation by our superintendent, Mr. Light. I did want to take one moment and just say that I will not be seeking re-election this year. This is my 9th year. It has been a pleasure, not always, but it has been a challenge and truly rewarding. And I hope that there are other people in the community that are willing to come and, to volunteer their time here. It has been extremely rewarding. Okay, I'm going to turn over to Superintendent Light. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to do public participation. Per school committee policy BEDH, members of the public are typically invited for up to 3 minutes regarding items that are not on the agenda. For items on the agenda, the public is asked to please wait for that item. Speakers must be recognized by the chair before speaking. The committee does not typically respond to comments during public participation. John.
John Peterson, 6 Jackson Drive. I begin by thanking Amy for her service. As she said, it is both rewarding and demanding, and so I very much appreciate that. And that's really, I just wanted to say briefly that the town election this year is moved. So the last 3 years, we've delayed Acton Town Meeting, but the town election has not moved. This year, the selectmen have moved the town election so that everything is basically a month behind. So the good news is that for everybody who's thinking about running for a school committee, they have February to do that because nomination papers can be pulled throughout the month of February. So I do encourage people who are interested in doing this good and important work to take advantage of that extra time. And of course, it also means when we're standing out holding signs, the weather should be better.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay, now, Peter.
All right, thank you, Amy. So a few items to update. First, I just wanted to share with the school committee, and I sent it to you in an email, and we sent it out to our community as well, but we're going to look to form a community leadership group, really in an effort to more proactively combat bias and hate speech in the schools. We've seen it impact all sorts of populations in our schools over a number of years now. And we've certainly implemented programs like, through the Anti-Defamation League, World of Difference program. We've done a lot of work around culturally responsive practice, and we're seeing the issue of biased speech that it can evolve into hate speech just persist on us. And we want to be proactive and address that. We also know that's not a technical challenge that there's just a solution to. We know it's an adaptive challenge that actually requires learning on the part of the schools, it requires learning on the part of the community, and it's actually going to require really learning on the part of our students to lead this work. And so we'd like to form a committee to provide some leadership that would lead to a visioning session to pull in a broad base of the community to provide some input around strategies that we think could work for Acton and Boxborough, and then lead the process of operationalizing that for programs and work that we can do with our students in schools directly to have a positive impact on the speech that our students use. So that is out there. There's a survey link that we sent out to families yesterday. We're going to send it out again. We are, in particular, looking for individuals who have experience having led different groups, whether they are student groups, whether they are community groups, parent groups, specifically working on issues of hate and bias. We really want to have an impactful leadership team for that, so we're inviting participation for that as well. I want to also give you an update on the principal searches that we're running. As you know, we have principal searches for the Conant, Douglas, and Gates elementary schools. I'm pleased to report that we had a deep pool of candidates that included a number of outstanding assistant principals as well as veteran principals. Each school community was represented by a group of staff and families. The group discussed priority qualities for candidates, completed anti-bias training, and developed questions used to screen candidates during the first round. Last night, we concluded that first round of interviews for all 3 schools and have started to identify some potential finalists. We are currently working on a schedule for finalists to visit the district and be able to start meeting a broader base of the school community. So we're looking forward to that process. We will be sending out information to staff and families about those finalist visits shortly. Finance director search, as you know, we're also in the process of searching for a finance director for next year. And we are pleased to report, we've gone through the initial screening rounds. We have identified a potential candidate to bring to you as a finalist. I anticipate doing that on February 16th. We're working through the process now, and we're just sensitive to the timing because the person is employed in another district, and we just want to make sure we're sensitive to how we roll that out. So you can anticipate February 16th, barring any unforeseen circumstances, that you would see that individual and be able to ask questions and interview the candidate. And then we would seek an appointment from the school committee, similar to what we did with the assistant superintendent position last meeting. And then finally, just an update on community coffees. As you know, Kyra and I host a series of community coffees through the year. We don't have one in February because of the break in budget season, but we do resume our community coffees on we do have a February time, and it is February 8th at 8:30 a.m. here in the administration building, so that's in-person community coffee for that one. We try to alternate morning and evening and Zoom and in-person. So we look forward to that. And then I also have included in some information going out tomorrow, a Green Advisory Council opportunity that Senator Eldridge is hosting on February 11th. And there's also a community-based youth mental health first aid training coming up in Acton that families may be interested in.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Okay, so let's move on to our next agenda item. This is our district math update. I'd like to welcome Deb Bookis, Jennifer Truslow, Dana Labb, Heather Haines, Kimberley Macey, and Jessica Carabellese. Carabellese, got it, Carabellese. And Joni Dean, your name was left off this. Can you believe that? Beth did it.
So thank you very much for the time for this presentation. We are all very excited to share the mathematics work of the district with all of you this evening. Sure. So as Amy just mentioned, the folks who will be presenting, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves before they each speak tonight. Heather Haines, who's our pre-K to 6 mathematics curriculum coordinator. Kimberley Macey, our junior high mathematics coordinator. Jessica Carabellese, our high school mathematics department leader. Dana Labb, principal of Blanchard. Joni Dean, our principal of the high school. Jennifer Truslow, director of special education. You've all seen already before our district goal, which is to increase the number of our students on a pathway to proficiency in literacy and mathematics through implementation of a multi-tiered system of supports, or better known as MTSS. The outcome is to increase the number of students meeting their stretch goals, with particular emphasis on students performing 1 or more grade levels below benchmark on their fall baseline assessment. So tonight we're going to be focusing on mathematics. Before we do that and share some of the results, Dana and I just wanted to circle back to a few of the questions that were asked a couple of weeks ago about universal screeners and MTSS.
So in the fall, we sent out a letter, we sent out an MTSS letter, and this is something that we worked on together as a team of principals in order to, it served a few purposes, one of which was just to inform all families of what MTSS is. So we had some DESI language in there explaining that. Also, we mentioned universal screeners in there and gave some information on that, but we also shared there would be times in which there may be instruction delivered from an individual other than the classroom teacher, and so we explained that in that writing as well. And then the other piece of that too is there's the technical piece. We also provided frequently asked questions in a glossary through the website as well, and I think that's up there now, right? Yep. So we spent a lot of time making sure that the letter we sent home didn't have a lot of educational jargon and was easy to understand, and started the conversation around MTSS happening at all the schools, but also gave information that if a student was going to be receiving ongoing support from another individual, that would be notified from that individual as well.
Historically, if a student is receiving ongoing supplemental instruction from a specialist, for over 20 years, we've had the reading specialist contact the families. What we did last year was we systemized it because we also had math specialists joining in with this work. And so we were able to create one letter for a reading specialist and one letter for math specialists to be sent to all families. And that happens before that supplemental instruction begins. So that system is in place presently. So what are some of our next steps and some of this work that we're doing? One of the things that we want to make sure is that any information that is shared about universal screening and the results matches actually how we're using the universal screener. So a universal screener is not a summative assessment of students' abilities or their skills or their knowledge. It's a screener, and we want to make sure that it's shared, that information is shared in the context of how we're using it. And that requires an incredible amount of adaptive work, and some of the shifts that have happened over the last year, 2 years, have been pretty monumental in terms of some of that adaptive work that our educators have had to do.
So one of the changes we did was we reconfigured the letter. We took out the DESI language around explaining what MTSS is, because we can embed that into the website and into other information. But we also added in more specific language around universal screeners and how we use them to inform our practice and our instruction. But we also have started working on language in order to make a commitment to making sure that we're sharing that at our progress meetings with families. So we wanted to make sure that both of those things were evident in there, but we also understand that this is an adaptive piece of work for instructors and educators as well. So while it's delightful that we're all doing MTSS, we're all having instructional meetings, we still need to work on how we communicate that to families and make sure that we understand how we're using these tools so that we can better give that information to families. And so Deb and I actually created that image that you see on there now in order to include in the letter, because there is a lot of different pieces of information that go into how we inform our next steps for instruction with students, and it's not any one piece. And I think when one of the things that came up in our meeting with all principals and leaders the other day was we were talking about how we want to inform families at home. We want to make sure we're really careful, and this goes back to what Deb was talking about with our goal, that what we're sharing with home matches what we're using them for. So if you look at that image, there's a lot of different things that go into supporting students. We want to make sure that a universal screener, specifically one like iReady, isn't looked at as the end-all be-all for how we determine groupings for students and how we base our instruction. So we've had a lot of conversations around making sure that the context in which we deliver that information home matches how we've delivered other pieces of information.
So at this point, what we're doing is we are going to be gathering some input and feedback from our school-based teams for some communication processes and documentation. So we want to hear from our teachers and our leadership teams at each of our schools. We are potentially going to then small-scale a pilot in the spring to try this out at the spring conferences so we can hear back from our educators and hear back from our families about that communication. And all of that is so that it can be timed and aligned with the new dyslexia amendment for informing parents and caregivers. So ready to launch all of that in the fall. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that it's so important for us when we're looking at data to do that through an equity lens, to make sure that we are making the strongest inferences that we can by using evidence and multiple points of evidence. And the leadership team right now is working with one of our equity facilitators to make sure that when we are looking at data, that we are doing it with that lens, and also to make sure that we are pulling out the stories that we need to pull out in the data.
Yes, and our work with Michelle Shannon through DataWise is one of those examples of that. So every principal now has 3 opportunities to work with their leadership team on a data dive. And so one of the things we discussed was how do we come acclimated with all the data points so that we can maneuver through and help make sense of them when we're planning instruction. One of the things we're going to be working on next Wednesday in our building, which we discussed as principals, is one of the things Michelle Shannon said is help support teachers in making meaning for themselves. So really how to unpack all of the data and look at the best ways and best practices in order to help support each student. And I think going through that process of the leadership team has been really valuable because we're able to help support teachers in doing that when they look at data on their own, but also be more acclimated to the data so that when we're sharing with families, we have a real deep understanding of what to look for and help support families in that matter.
Okay, so moving on to some of our iReady and MCAS results. This slide represents the fall aggregate results for grades 1 through 8. You can see that 30% of our students scored at the mid or above grade level, 23% scored at early on grade level, 35% at 1 grade below, 7% at 2 grades below, and 6% at 3 or more grades below. And again, this is the fall, so this is the fall diagnostic window, and students who are performing at 1 grade below is really very consistent with students who have just begun that school year. So this next slide actually shows the 35% or the 955 students who scored 1 grade below broken out by grade. And these are the students for whom, consistent grade level instruction, effective tier 1 core instruction benefits in the class. And right now we are in the middle of our January assessment, so we'll be able to see how students have done from the fall to January relatively soon. So when we take a look at the 327 students, or approximately 11.9% of students who scored 2 or 3 or more grade levels below, this is how it's broken out by grade. And these are the students for whom, as Dana was talking about before, we need to take a look at all the other tools that we have, assessments, observations, unit assessments, classroom-based practices, those kinds of things, so that we can close their growth goals as quickly as possible. And again, we'll take another look to see how they're doing with this mid-January assessment. If we take a deeper dive into some of the data, and you've seen this chart before with the literacy review, of the 327 students assessed that were 2, 3, or more grade levels below, so if we're taking a look at the first, actually the second row for multilingual students, 84 students, or approximately 26% of students, were also multilingual. If we look across at the same line, there are 165 students who are multilingual who were assessed. 84 of them represents 51% of that student group. So of this 327 students, they represented 26% of those students, but of their student group, of all the students who were assessed, they represented 51%. And that, if you read down the list from special education students, economically disadvantaged, Asian, Black students, 2 or more races, white students, and our Hispanic students, we can see that the percentage of our students who are multilingual, students who have an IEP, who are economically disadvantaged, Black and Hispanic, those groups are too large. At 51%, 41%, 42%, 32%, and 45%. So it's disproportionate, and that is the area in which we need to focus.
And Deb, can I just pause you for 1 second there? Because I get to see everyone's faces, and this is a mind-blowing slide for everyone.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure everyone is looking at this the same way. On the left-hand column, that's looking at all 327 students who were assessed, who scored 2 or more grade levels below.
Right.
Of those 327 students, you're looking at the percentage of those who were multilingual special education, correct?
So, yeah, so of the
Right.
327 students, that's how the demographics broke down, and of course, a student can be in more than one one category.
Correct, so it's not going to add up to 327
Right.
perfectly because students can fall into one. That's what I wanted to make sure everyone understood.
Okay.
On the right, that's a different metric, all right? And so on the right, it's saying, okay, we have 165, sorry, the eyes aren't that good anymore, 165 multilingual learners who were assessed. 51% of them scored 2 or more grade levels below, all right? So that's looking at the total population for each of those subgroups and the percentage of the population that scored 2 or more grade levels below. We wanted to highlight this because it's showing that we have a lot of work to do around disproportionate outcomes.
It's a math presentation, so the 84 multilingual students is approximately half of the 165 students in that multilingual student group.
Right.
I did.
So, sorry, I wanted to pause there because I just saw the faces and,
So Peter, can you please explain the right column again? I don't think I was following. Is it right or left for you?
Sure. So of the multilingual students population,
So-
there are 165 students who are multilingual, who are
Yeah.
assessed.
Yeah, which
So-
makes 51% of the total group,
Group, right. So
Yes.
the column in the left side of the chart there, the 84 students who scored 2 or 3 more grade levels below who are multilingual, they represent almost half, or actually a little bit more than half of the 165 students in that group, that multilingual group.
Students that were tested, half of them came out 2
one or grade
or more grade levels below.
below.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, totally understand. No, thank you for the clarity, appreciate it. So just to mention a few things that we're doing to address this, we are definitely continuing with a deeper implementation of our mathematics core curriculum, which is illustrative math, including something that's called a check for readiness assessments, and Heather will speak a little bit more to that later in the presentation. We are obviously continuing with our MTSS structures to better support students K through 6. We have some other supports in grades 7 through 8. We have directed study and after-school help for students, and you'll also hear some ways that support is being provided for our students in grades 9 through 12 a little bit later in the presentation. We also know that student engagement, which is one of our core values, is connected to student learning, as is student behavior and SEL. Our elementary schools are working with Jessica Minahan, all of our instructional support teams, to create similar processes that are built on evidence-based practices across all of our elementary schools. And this is so we can better address the needs of our diverse students. We're also continuing responsive classroom, which will help us improve Tier 1 instruction and address the social and emotional needs of our students at the elementary level. At the junior high and high school, of course, we're continuing to build out advisory, which really helps students feel a sense of connectedness and that sense of belonging. But this data also shows us as a district why we need to continue all of our anti-bias work, which is our SEED work, and our work with our culturally responsive teacher leaders to continue identifying some of the access barriers for our students. We're going to turn over to MCAS for a minute. You've seen this slide before. MCAS is a system monitoring accountability system, but we can also use it for standards and curricular alignment. I want to just focus on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th bullet. Just as a reminder, this is how DESI advised us to use the results this year, and to just be reminded that the last 2.5 years have not been normal. So the results are going to be a little bit different. That access to instruction for so many of our students was disrupted, and for us to just find the bright spots and where recovery has already started. Just as also as a reminder, the last several years, the test administration of MCAS has not been consistent. We had full administration in 2019. No tests were administered in 2020. In 2021, grades 3 through 8 had half a test administered, grade 10 had the full test, and then in 2022, full test administration again. So it varied across. It also is a reminder that our grade 10 students in 2022 had not taken an MCAS since grade 7, so many years in between. So a little bit about our math aggregate data. The change in, so again, I'll walk you through this a little bit. Please let me know if there are some questions. So if we're looking at the white columns first on the right-hand side, you'll see the change in meeting and exceeding expectations. The first column is from 2019 to 2021, and then you'll see the change column, meeting and exceeding expectations from 21 to 22, and then that cumulative change, so added together from 2019 to 2022. So we can see that all of our columns in 2021, 2022 are trending in the positive direction. And in fact, for grades 5, for grade 6, and for grade 8, it was almost a complete reversal. So from negative 22 to a positive 19, from negative 15 to a positive 15, and negative 23 to a positive 22. Even in 3rd and 4th grade, it's trending towards a positive, with percent proficiency increasing 5 and 4. And then in 7th and 10th grade, it has certainly slowed in the negative percent. So -1, which is almost negligible, and -4 for 10th grade. So that's one way to read the chart. Another way for us to read this chart is to look at cohorts across the years. So starting in the left column, in the orange column for 2019, our students in grade 3 in 2019 scored at 81% of our students scored meeting and exceeding expectation. And then as 5th graders at 57%, but then as 6th graders at 86%. Grade 4 started at 79%, then as 6th graders scored 71% proficiency, and then meeting and exceeding expectations rather, and then as 7th graders, 74%, so again, bouncing back. For grade 5, they started with 79%, as 7th graders at 75%, and then as 8th graders back to 79%. Grade 7, which is the yellow circles, 7th grade, 78%, and then as 10th graders, 81%. The one grade that we're watching is grade 6. You can see in 2019 at grade 6, 86%, and then in 2021 at 57%. And so this is the year that they are 10th graders in 2023, so we will have to see how they do on the 10th grade MCAS. So that is a group, a cohort that we are watching. Yep, Gavin? So I think it's green, the 57. It looks yellow and the blue. Sorry, I think it's just the way the color showed up.
Oh, that's green?
Yeah, it's 78 and 81 is the yellow.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, I thought, yeah.
No, because it's not a year over, because it's 2 years in between 2019 and then 2021. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So this is a math presentation, but I wanted to make sure that I also shared the science results of MCAS. So again, by cohort, our grade 5 students in 2019, 65% of them were meeting and exceeding expectations. Then as 8th graders in 2022, 75% were meeting and exceeding expectations. Another way to look at this is, of course, again, by the grade level. So our 5th graders, there was a 1% positive change from 2019 to 2021, which is pretty terrific when we think about those years. And at grade 8, certainly trending in the right direction for 21, 22, so in the positive direction. There are no 10th grade STE Science MCAS scores for the 2019 8th graders, and that's because students in the class of 2023 were not required to take the STE test, you might recall, for graduation. So that's why there are no scores there. The other thing that's important to point out is this is a brand new, last year was the first time that our students took, all students in Massachusetts took the brand new science test, the 10th grade science test. So the scores aren't comparable at all from year to year. But we started off with 85% of our students meeting or exceeding. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Jen.
So, similar to what we talked about during our literacy presentation, I just wanted to review with you what student growth percentile is and what it means. It's basically how the state measures achievement over time. It does use a cohort model to compare students across the state. And as a reminder, in 2021, the state used a different calculation that can't be compared to this year's scores that we're going to be showing you. Due to the differences in the test, the growth percentiles between 2021 and 2022 cannot be compared.
Talk about this,
I'm sorry.
just the growth.
Well, I'm sorry, we can see that the students actually experienced very high growth and typical growth across that test. Okay. So this slide shows the scores for our 3rd through 8th graders. Of note is our students with disabilities who showed typical growth but lower achievement as compared to all our students across the district. We see similar for our Hispanic, Latino, African American, and Black students. Another note is that you can see a significant increase in the number of ML students from 102 to 287 students. And also our EL students showed good achievement and high growth. This slide shows our scores for our 10th graders. Again, students with disabilities showed typical growth, but still did not achieve at the level of our students in the district. Our Hispanic and Latino students showed a decrease in meeting and exceeding expectation. Typical growth, yet still lower achievement than students across the district. And of note, our EL and African American Black students, the growth percentile and designation cannot be reported because the number is less than 20 in both 2021 and 2022. Yep.
Turn to Heather.
Thanks. Not too much more time on MCAS, I promise. So this slide shows how students in grades 3, 4, and 5 performed by domain. And so the vertical axis is telling you what percentage of the points students in those grades earned for each of those domains. And so I just wanted to share with you some of the decisions that we made with our elementary students as a result of the pandemic and hybrid learning and some interrupted schooling. That may be some of the reasons why we see some differences in this chart compared to what we've seen in the past. So you can see in grades 3 and 4 that a relative weakness for those students is the geometry domain. And one of the recommendations that I made to teachers was that they spend the majority of their time on the focus standards for the grade, as well as prerequisite standards that would impact students' understanding of those grade level focus standards. And in grades 3 and 4, geometry is not a focus standard for the grade. So the fact that students performed relatively lower on those standards makes sense given that. In 5th grade, there is a focus standard in geometry. Students first learn about volume in 5th grade, and you can see relative to the other 5th grade domains, students performed about the same in geometry as they did in those other areas. One of the things that we're looking at, Deb was sharing with you about cohorts, is just thinking about how the pandemic impacted different groups of students based on what learning they missed in the year that we had, left school in March. And so in times past, we had sort of a nice staircase from 3rd to 4th to 5th to 6th grade. And you can see that that staircase doesn't quite exist in the same way it did before. So we used to see that 5th grade bar up above the 3rd and 4th grade. And so some of the content that students missed in that March to June time, who were 3rd graders at that time, was fractions. And so, that's a really big part of 5th grade. And so to have to come back and pull together some of that unfinished learning might be some of that impact. But we'll keep an eye on that cohort as they continue on. And so 6th grade has different domains than 3rd through 5th grade do. And you can see, relatively speaking, that probability and statistics is a relative weakness for 6th grade. It is a focus standard, and I think it is a critical area, but it also happens to be the last unit of the year. And so when students took the MCAS in late April, early May, they probably had not yet started that unit. So it would make sense that they probably wouldn't have done as well on that as they would have if we tested them, say, June 15th. And so as Deb shared before, we can look at all of this data, and it's important data for us to think about, how are our decisions about what we're teaching in the classroom impacting students' learning, and how are we seeing how cohorts are growing over time. But we also want to think about how can we support all of our students to be able to access grade level content. And so one of the things that the math specialists and I have worked on over the past couple of years is for grades 6 to 8, the curriculum has check for readiness assessments in it, where there's an assessment of prior grade standards that students need to understand in order to access the grade level content of the unit that they're going to be working on. Those didn't exist for K through 5. So we've looked at the unit dependency charts, and we have those check for readiness assessments for each of the units for K through 5, as well as spreadsheets that teachers can use to look at that data and use that to make decisions to say, does my whole class need to do a couple of lessons from the prior grade before we start the unit so that students can all access it? Or is there a small group of students who needs to work with a teacher during flex block or with a math specialist?
I'm just curious, when we looked at that original data and you were talking about the things that we're doing to fix it, obviously our kids who are in the upper reaches of elementary school as well as middle school and high school are the ones who didn't have MTSS and who have missed out on the biggest chunks. Has there been any consideration of putting win blocks or what you need blocks or whatever into those grades? Because I can tell you, working in a less fortunate, like socioeconomically well-off district, they did that at the high school in Clinton, and to get help during the day without having to stay after school, without having to uncomfortably engage with a teacher, made a huge difference. And I just wonder, when you look at the populations of kids that we're missing, plus kids with disabilities are absolutely exhausted at the end of the day. So to go get extra help at the end of the day is less than ideal.
So I don't want to steal thunder, but I'll let Jessica talk a little bit more about some of the things that they're putting in place at the high school.
So layering on what Tessa just said, I wonder if subsequent data, particularly the iReady data, if we can see it on a year-by-year basis. I see we're putting a lot of resources, investing a lot of resources in MTSS and all these things to get the kids ready. So it'd be nice to see it a year-by-year basis to really try and understand if we're making a dent in the number of kids that are achieving these metrics. But my other question is, what are we doing around really trying to understand the root cause of why these kids are not achieving or reading or having their math proficiency below, a certain grade level?
Evelyn, to answer the first part, iReady, so we assess 3 times a year, and so our intent now is to communicate home, both for the conferences in the fall and in the spring, and share that information, but also now what we're talking about as a team is how we want to deliver that information mid-year when there isn't conferences. And does everybody get that communication home regardless of how they performed, or do we have a benchmark at which we do that in the middle? I think that's something we need to start workshopping together. So if we do something in the spring to try to figure out what works, we want to hear feedback from families too about how much information is sufficient and helpful. In terms of your second part, to go back to what Michelle Shannon had kind of recommended for our team, which is to help lead the teachers to kind of some of the solutions. We're all doing some trauma training right now, and so we talk about adverse childhood experiences and ACEs and how much that has impacted some of the students in our district. And so that's one consideration to answer like a broad question that you have about that we're digging into. So one of the things I know more than one team is doing at the building level, principals, is to start looking at other factors that are playing into what we are seeing academically and really starting to peel back layers of the onion now to look at how can we help support students in other ways. Because we are seeing things in the buildings that we know is definitely impacting the ability for students to even engage in some of the work that we're trying to do together. And that's going to require us, a lot of teachers, to get flexible, and that's that adaptive work to look at how can we change our instructional approaches in order to help try to impact student achievement.
Hi, thank you guys. I have a couple of questions. One is, how quickly do you get the results from both iReady and MCAS?
So iReady, it can be seen as soon as a student finishes the assessment, and so over that, I think we extended another week, so over 3 weeks now, because there's quite a bit of sickness and students were out, so we can see those results at that time. What we're also planning for next year, Dana was talking about, is making sure also that when we're giving the assessments, we also have time for our ILT, our teams and our data teams as a school to review that data, so our schools and our teachers can make sense of it and start thinking about some of those instructional decisions, and then timing that with then conferences for families. So making sure that there's a progression there so that that information has been shared and talked about. MCAS we don't get until the fall. So students take it in the spring. Sometimes it comes to us late September, sometimes not until mid-October.
And then my second question is, I'm not sure if everybody's aware that MCAS is not required in each grade. What grades is it required for graduation? Because you can opt out if you want to, other than the graduation requirement.
So grade 10 MCAS is what they call competency determination. And so students have to take the 10th grade MCAS and pass it in order to graduate.
Okay, so just so everybody is clear, you don't have to have your kids take the MCAS except for a 10th grade. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm curious whether you looked at, we saw all the slides of across the years of the cohorts meeting or exceeding on MCAS, but for those percentages of kids who are below that, did you look at the data and see how they tracked across the last few years? In other words, if there were 24% of kids who were not meeting or exceeding grade level expectations, it's great if there's 76% that are, but what about the rest of them, and what has happened to them since the start of the pandemic?
Yeah, so the individual students, at the school level and at the classroom level, so this is big aggregate data, so that, if it went from 78% to 84%, some of those students are in that, percentage. And then, yes, thinking about the students who might still be partially meeting or not meeting expectations, standards. We do know by 10th grade, sort of the percentages of students who are not meeting expectations so that we can provide tutoring. And then we do know that all of our students are able to graduate because they do pass in one way or the other for MCAS. So we do follow it that way across.
Right, but I mean to do a similar slide like the ones we saw, to say, it was 24% this year. Now, what's going on with them?
I haven't done that, no.
Okay. I think that that's something that would be worth reviewing.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions before we send it to the audience?
Well, we're going to finish up the
Yes.
presentation. So a couple of our folks are going to leave, and we have some more folks coming for the rest of the presentation.
Do you want to have Amanda ask her question?
Oh, sure.
I don't, yeah, and then
Okay, I
we'll.
just wanted to make sure you knew it wasn't over.
Yes, yes, yes. You can't all leave, yes.
Thank you, Amy. I just want to say I have deep appreciation for the people sitting at this table and the work that has gone into this. This entire MTSS rollout has been a monumental shift, and I do appreciate that, and I don't want that to get lost. When the supplemental instruction letter goes out from the math and reading specialist, does that include information about how progress will be monitored and reported to families?
I don't think the letter expressly states how it's going to be monitored. Heather, I don't know if you have, although there's that communication between the specialist and the teacher and the parent.
So the letter doesn't say specifically how progress will be monitored, but there would be the opportunity for there to be a communication between the family and the specialist. And when the child has been, when assessments have shown that they've made effective progress and they no longer need to see the specialist, there is a letter that goes home to the families saying that the child no longer is working with the specialist. I can speak to the majority of how that progress monitoring is happening in math. I can't speak to reading. So in math, the specialists are using the Bridges intervention curriculum, and the structure of that curriculum is that you have modules that students are working on, and in a week there are 4 lessons that students are doing, and the 5th day is a progress monitoring day so that the specialist can see if the student is understanding the content and if they need to go back and do a second week, or if the students are, as a group, ready to move on.
Thank you. And to be clear, parents can request that at any point, that information, because it's part of the student record.
Can you ask that a question again?
And to be clear, parents and guardians can request that information at any point because it's part of the student record. Great, thank you. Have the parents and guardians of the 327 students who screened at 2 or 3 or more grades below level been informed that that was the case?
No, as we said, we're working on figuring out and determining what's the best way for us to, as a group, first look at this data and do that adaptive work and understand how to use the data before that data is then shared out. I would imagine, though, that many of the students who scored in that way, and again, looking at all the other assessment data, might also be students who are working with a math specialist or a reading specialist because of the results of that data, and so they perhaps have been informed in that way. That system piece is in place.
Okay. And you mentioned a small pilot at spring conferences to help share that information. Mm-hmm. If those 327 students are still performing at that level in the mid-year iReady, will those families be told?
So, go ahead, David. That's what, yeah, go ahead.
Great question. Yes, that's what we're discussing right now.
Got it.
Yep.
And I just want to underscore that it's not just the students with disabilities who are in that head count, it's the ones lurking who haven't yet been identified as potentially having disabilities. Not all of them will. There may be instructional gaps for various reasons, but parents have a right to make an evaluation request for special ed eligibility. No one wants to see a bump in unnecessary referrals. No one wants that. The kids don't want it, the parents don't want it, you all don't want it. But we can't make informed decisions or meaningfully engage if we don't know. So thank you for looking at how to convey the information and for looking at the whole child as you do this and for including us. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, but keep going.
Okay, so I'm going to invite Kimberley and Jessica and Joni to join me and Heather.
Yes. All right, so now we're going to have some fun. So we're going to share with you some of the work that we've been doing to engage students in mathematics across K through 12. And we thought a helpful lens for thinking about that would be through the standards for mathematical practice. As you all probably are aware, Massachusetts math frameworks have a unique set of content standards at each grade, but for K through 12, this same set of standards for math practice exists for all of those grades. Obviously, the work of a kindergartner and the work of a 12th grader are very different, but these are the habits of mind that we want students to be using when they're engaging with mathematics. And so the standard that I'm going to look through in terms of the K to 6 mathematics work is going to be constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others, and how we're supporting all of our students to be able to do that work. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can get you to play with me. So we're gonna imagine I have this nice chart paper here. I couldn't figure out how I was gonna hang a chart paper up in this forum, but I would like to see if you will do some math with me. Very small amount of math. And the math that we're gonna do is going to be comparing fractions, only one fraction problem. And before we do that work, I wanna see if we can collect some ways that you all know that you could use for comparing fractions. So what strategy might you use to figure out whether a fraction was greater or lesser than another? Oh, Tessa, you're willing to play with me. I'm so proud.
I love math.
Excellent.
Common denominator.
Excellent. Anybody else?
I would say draw a picture.
Nice. Draw a picture.
I like pictures.
Yes, me too. Anybody have another one? One that I like to use, and I wouldn't do this, I would make my students wait in the classroom, but I'm not going to make you all wait. Benchmarks. So I know about like halves and wholes and zeros, so that's one that I like to use too. And another one that truthfully I never learned when I was in elementary school is the common numerator. Okay. So now we're going to do a true-false, and we have these strategies that we might use for when we're comparing our fractions. And you're going to put a thumb up if you think my statement is true, and a thumb down if you think my statement is false. Okay. So 2/6 is equal to 2/8. Thumb up, thumb down. All right, we seem to have a consensus that we agree that 2/6 is not equal to 2/8. Will you go to the next one? Thank you. So that must mean that one of these fractions is larger than the other fraction. So how do you know which of these fractions is greater? And so you might phrase your answer with this sentence frame: I know blank is greater than blank because. Tessa?
I'm a teacher. I know that 2/6 is bigger than 2/8 because when you divide a circle or anything into 6, the pieces are bigger than eighths. So 2 of them would be bigger than the 2/8.
Thank you. Very nice. So thank you for engaging with me in that math activity. And the reason why I wanted to do that was to share with you some of the work that we've been doing this year to help support all of our students to be able to do that, constructing viable arguments. So next one. Excuse me. The math language routines are routines that were developed at the Scale Center, and they are embedded within the IM curriculum. We just used 2 of them. You all helped me to collect and display some of the strategies that we might use, and this is supportive for all of our students, helps to, bring back in the brain things that maybe we didn't remember before, and for students for whom English isn't their first language, gives them some good vocabulary to start with, some good ideas. And then when I ask you to tell me which fraction was greater, I used a sentence frame to help all students to be able to frame their thinking, and that's an example of a discussion support that's going to be embedded. And so this is one of the ways that we can support all of our students. This year, all of our elementary teachers, our EL teachers, and special educators engaged in some professional learning to do a deeper dive into the math language routines and how they can use those. And then they had some time to look at the curriculum, the upcoming unit, and think about which routines were going to be there and how might they think about facilitating those. Really exciting, we have some K-12 work that's been happening. So last year, we had a group of K-6 teachers who, as part of an optional professional learning, read the book, Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics. This year, the math specialists, the STEAM coaches and I are reading the book together, and we have a group of 7 through 12 educators who are also reading the book. So Peter Liljedahl, who's the author here, is a former high school math teacher and is now a professor at, I believe, Simon Fraser. And he spent 15 years researching the question, how do we get students to do more thinking in math class? And so he came up with, as a result of that research, 14 practices that educators can do to try to get their students to do more thinking in math. And 2 of those practices that you see in this, well, you only see one of them in this photo, but 2 of the practices that teachers are using as they start to think about this work are visibly random groupings. So ways that students can see that the teacher did not pre-decide who they were working with, as well as vertical non-permanent surfaces, which is a fancy way of saying a whiteboard. So it's important that the surface is vertical so that students are standing. We all know when we're standing up, we're more awake. Also, that it's not a permanent surface, so it doesn't feel as threatening to write something down because it's really easy to erase it. And so these are some of our students across our schools who are engaging in this work in their classrooms. And in the next slide, we'll see if my fancy video works. You can't really hear the students, but you can see and kind of hear that they are talking to each other. They are engaged in the mathematics, and they are engaged in the math practices. They are persevering in problem solving. They are modeling with mathematics. There is only one pen, so they have to construct viable arguments and possibly critique the reasoning of others. And you can see no one is telling them what they have to do. They are all engaged in the mathematics. I don't know why it's looping. Yeah, it's okay. And now Kimberley will share about 7 through 12.
Hello, I'm Kimberley Macey, and I'm an 8th grade math teacher and the math department leader at R.J. Gray. I'm going to be sharing how the curriculum in grades 7 to 8 encourage students to reason abstractly and quantitatively and to look for and make use of structure. So we are implementing the IM curriculum that the K-6 school classrooms are as well, but we're using it through the Desmos platform. Desmos started as a graphing calculator, but has grown into a tool that allows students to fully interact with the math. Using the Desmos platform with the IM curriculum makes it more accessible for students to learn math through reasoning and structure. So I'm going to walk you through, just so you can get a sense of what a daily lesson looks like in the IM. It will be a little bit of a lightning speed through here, but this is a part of the arc of a lesson that we would do. This is a lesson called Flags, and it is in the beginning of our linear equations unit. So how do I close that one? Okay, just ignore the part at the bottom there. So this is the opening, the warm-up, and the students can then just they have access, they're doing this on their own Chromebooks, and they can keep pressing play and seeing how, and making a relation, seeing how the relationship between the flag and the graph will take place. Then they'll talk about it, and they'll notice, a lot of students will notice that, well, the graph doesn't start at 8, and the flag didn't start at 8, and we can draw conclusions about that. Is it a double click? I'm not doing this right.
That's a PC. Where do you want to get out of this?
I'm trying to hit the next button. No, I don't want to get out. I want. That's okay. That's fine.
There you go.
All right, and then on the next 2 slides, they are looking. I'm sorry. They are looking to find the y-intercept and the slope. There we go. And then we bring in a second flag. So now they're going to start to make a comparison. And this is where the, I did skip a slide. Okay, this is where the students are going to start to make the comparison, and they are asked to graph the second flag. And they took the rest of the flag away so the students could really just focus on that line. And so now the students are using some reasoning. They're thinking, okay, well, what do I have to do? I'm going to have to think about that starting point for that flag. I'm going to have to think about the rate at which it is going up. And then they will create their, line to show it, and then we'll talk about it. We'll say, okay, so now that we've drawn these lines, can you tell by the graph which one is going faster, which one is going slower, and what's happening right here where they crisscross. So the graphs are making sense to them. They're a tool that they're using. On this slide now, they're asked to convert it into a table. And you'll notice that for the table, they'll see that it's going up by 2 each time, but then it jumps to 6. So here's where the reasoning takes place. They're going to have to think about, well, what would it be at 6 seconds? And it's not going to be 12, because 6 times 2 is 12. Why not? And the students will think about, oh, well, that's because it's not starting at 0, it's starting at 16. So then we have some discussion about this, and we talk about why it's not 12 and why it's 28. And then on this one, you'll see that when they're filling in the table, at the very last, it's now a t. So now they have to generalize and figure out that that one is going to be 2t, but then also a plus 16. And they don't get that right away. We have a whole conversation about it. But when they get to the 2t plus 16, they've now created a linear slope-intercept form. We haven't mentioned it, we haven't started y equals mx plus b yet, but they now have an idea of what those numbers mean, that 2 is that rate of change and that 16 is their starting point. And then this is going to tie it back into the graphing again. Now they have to think about using that structure that they have of the starting point and the rate of change to think about flag C. And they're looking at this and they're like, oh, well, there's my starting point of 16. So H equals 16. And then my rate of change, and we've talked about how to calculate slopes, they can do that, or they might notice that the rate of change is the same as A. And so some students will do it either way, and now they have used structure and reasoning to develop this equation. And then the last slide is my favorite. This one is where the students now can play. Well, I use that word lightly. They are constructing, they can make a third flag do whatever they want to do. So we can say, let's have it start really low, like at 5, but let's have it go up really fast. And students try to break decimals, so they'll put like 1,000 T in. But, and then they can say, oh, look, now I made it go really fast. And we'll ask them questions like, can you try to make the flag go down instead of up? And they'll think about it, and then they'll put it up. They'll start it at 40, and then they'll put a negative rate of change, and then the flag goes down. And what's nice about this program that you can't do with paper and pencil is they can just manipulate the numbers and physically see what happens every time they make a change in the number. And then from there, we will then start to talk about the actual y equals mx plus b, but now they have a context in which to place it, and it all makes a lot more sense to them. And they've also seen that connection between a situation, a graph, and a table, and the equation. And so that is what our curriculum is, but we also, in addition to that, we are using the Building Thinking Classrooms strategies and routines for reasoning. So you wouldn't see us doing decimals every day. We do when that lesson lends itself, but then other days we might be doing some of the vertical whiteboard work or group work at desks, and then sometimes paper and pencil activities, as those are the most appropriate for that concept.
Thank you. I'm just going to quickly introduce the high school work here in math. I'm the principal, of course, Joni Dean, and I'm here with Jess Carabellese, and she's our high school math department leader. In the high school, we're doing some work to examine our course level structure, as you might know, and we're working to think of ways to provide more access and opportunities for all of our students. And I think you'll hear probably about some community discussions coming up soon for us to share some of these ideas and invite discussion and feedback from the community. In particular in math, and Jess is going to speak about this more specifically, we're working to open pathways to some of our advanced level courses, and we've already started some of that work. Additionally, the math teachers have been working really hard over the course of all of their years, but specifically recently, especially after the after effects of COVID, to work to engage students, provide supports, and really think about ways to offer more opportunities to them. And so I'm going to turn this over to Jess to talk more specifically about that. Jess?
Thank you so much. Thank you all for inviting us here to speak tonight. It's really exciting to see what's going on around the district. For those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Jess Carabellese, and I'm the department chair at the high school for the math department. As Joni mentioned, the math department at the high school has been focusing on several key areas, including opening opportunities to students, exploring instructional strategies, and then establishing supports for those students in our increasingly heterogeneous learning environments. So for focus area number 1, we're working to increase access, opportunities, and choice for students to study advanced level coursework. Now, advanced meaning a higher level within a course or pursuing goals to move further along a course sequence, really focusing on students' math interests and their goals with their time at the high school. We've widened our course recommendation guidelines, and we've implemented more flexible override process. We've reduced summer school requirements for students seeking to move to a higher level math class. And I'm very excited to share that next year we're piloting a program with our Algebra 1 course for students who typically would have enrolled to take algebra over the course of 2 years. We're supporting them and designing new courses to support them in taking algebra in 1 year in grade 9. So that's a very exciting initiative that we're beginning our work in. We're also increasing collaboration with students and families to identify and support their math goals. As part of the transition to grade 9 process, we're collaborating more with grade 8 in terms of using holistic rubrics of math indicators for success in the course recommendation process, rather than just relying on a year average, looking at indicators of success in collaboration with families and talking about students with their math goals to determine the right course placement for grade 9. Our second focus area is exploring instructional strategies, and certainly the pandemic energized us in this work, and we've been continuing these pursuits ever since. Much of our work centers on creating learning environments that foster Math Practice 1 and Math Practice 3, making sense of problems and persevering in solving them, constructing viable arguments, and critiquing the reasoning of others. Some of these strategies include diversifying our use of technology. Much of our school-wide professional learning this year has centered on reflection and goal setting, as well as questioning strategies. We're also pursuing collaborative activities and discussion, activities that allow students to experience first and formalize later. alternative assessment, and also thinking about the classroom environment in terms of desk arrangement, access to collaborative materials, the vertical working spaces, really thinking about what does it mean to work and collaborate and be a mathematician, be a computer scientist, what does that look like? The list goes on, but we're really focusing on strategies that develop a conceptual understanding of math principles, the strategies, formulas, and applications. And these pictures shown, the two with the textbooks are from our geometry class. They had a bridge building contest, and on the right, we had a little Barbie bungee jump activity in statistics. So lastly, we're really focusing on establishing supports for students in our increasingly heterogeneous learning environments. Certainly the instructional strategies from the last slide, but we're also thinking about curriculum and essential concepts, overarching concepts for our students. Now, during the pandemic and the hybrid teaching, and as we've moved beyond, we were working really diligently to think about alignment with each course, all levels of each course, as well as if you pick one level and you follow the course sequence along, looking at alignment there with our curriculum. So if we tweak something in Algebra 1, are we thinking about all the levels of Algebra 1? And are we thinking about how that follows down the sequence as you continue through the classes in the high school? Now, as we're digging deeper into the aforementioned instructional strategies, we're continuing this work in conjunction with thinking about the NCTM essential concepts in each area, meaning what are the larger unifying conceptual understandings that will, one, provide the foundation for engagement with the 8 math practices that we've been speaking of tonight, but two, are allowing teachers to provide high quality instruction that helps students develop a deep understanding of math. Those are a lot of the initiatives inside the classroom, but we also have initiatives for support going on outside the classroom. I'm really excited to share that we're finally able to offer a math-specific academic support center next year. That will be a really great support for our students who are going to be part of our pilot program for completing a full year of Algebra 1, when typically they might have taken it over 2 years. So that's a very exciting initiative for us. We also have an after-school math extra help center. We're in our second year of being able to offer that. That's in addition to students attending their teachers' standard extra help sessions, but if they're looking for extra spaces that they can collaborate with teachers or peers in a supportive environment, we offer that after school as well. And we're really trying to partner with students in this work. So we're growing with our student mentors in classes, and we also have some after-school clubs that want to participate in peer tutoring for our students. So that's everything that I had, but again, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me here tonight. I'm so grateful to be able to be part of this discussion, and I also want to deeply thank the teachers for all their hard work with these initiatives.
So we highlighted all of these things during our presentation already, so this is just a collection of the big ideas of the work that we've been working on. And as Jess said, we want to thank all the educators, staff, school, and district leaders for the work they do to support the full development of every ABRSD student every day.
Thank you. So I will open it up for questions, but I'd like to just start by saying the elementary school I think the math program has always been very engaging, very hands-on, but I am so excited to hear about what's happening at the junior high, and it sounds like at the high school too. I just believe so strongly that students need to understand what they're doing instead of trying to memorize a series of steps. And that's just because my personal experience in school was I didn't have the greatest memory, so when I got lost doing long division, I had no idea what I was even doing. I just had to go back and remember the steps. So I just find it really exciting, and I'm extremely optimistic for what our kids are going to be doing. Thank you so much, because making any kind of a change in the midst of all COVID and you know, all of the things that have been thrown at teachers is incredibly difficult, but I'm incredibly appreciative of it. So, other people, comments, questions?
I sort of want to echo that a little bit, and I actually noticed my third grader will come home with his math worksheets, and that was one of the pieces that I noticed was that sort of dialogue, you know, thinking about a problem in several different ways. And I remember just looking at that and thinking that that was really smart, and I think that it's setting them up for success. And especially, you know, my third grader has always been very good at math, but not so good necessarily at explaining it. So I think it's really making them well-rounded, and I'm really excited for all these initiatives. Thank you.
Okay, can I be a little bit of a downer? I think that everything you're sharing is amazing, and I agree about Desmos, even though my child did Desmos during COVID, and that kind of sucked. But I did appreciate the Desmos platform, and I think it's really cool, the way that you can play with it. Like, I do think that that's awesome. And I do like illustrative math, and I think it's awesome. Do kids want to be tutored by their peers? Because my personal experience is that my kid would rather die than be tutored by somebody who is like in school with them. And I know that those kids who are really good at math are super excited about tutoring other kids, but looking at the flip side of that, like, and I still don't hear a lot about, other than the academic support, which you said would specifically really help the pilot program in 9th grade, which is great. Like, what about the kids that just cannot stay after school? Like, all of this, like, why can't this happen during the day in classrooms? And I understand we've done like up and down all over the place with the high school schedule and how to do it. I know we don't have block scheduling with longer blocks and all of that, but I just wish we'd think like a little outside of the box for the kids who are really struggling, because I think we do so much thinking about the kids who are really good at school and giving them opportunities to be even better at school that I just wish we were just a little bit more creative in like pulling in those kids that just need more processing time. They might be really good at math, but our math curriculum goes really fast. So that's just my feedback. I do appreciate all that you do. I am an AB grad. I'm thrilled that you have taken the reins and are a new math curriculum. Like, that's great. I think it's amazing, since the one who was the department leader when I was there just left. So I think it's amazing, but I just encourage you to think outside the box for the kids who don't love math, to help them love it. Because in elementary school, I think they do, and I don't really think it's till they get to the high school that they're like, I'm terrible at this. So that's just my feedback. So thank you, though, for all that you do.
Excuse me, that was a lot to unpack, but I have a couple things that I think I would love to chat about. I think keeping those students at the center of our work, those students who might have struggled, those students who are interested but are struggling to engage or have that confidence, that piece that we need to develop. And what you're mentioning about the student mentor program, certainly all students who are in rooms with mentors might have a different response to having a peer in with them. That can be a complicated, yeah. After, okay, right, the peer tutors. Okay, so I was gonna talk about.
The peer tutor part, not the mentor part.
I see. Okay, I was going to say, I love our mentor program, and I was going to talk always about that. So the after school peer tutor, yeah. So we have some clubs of students who are interested in participating in mathematics, the Her and Math Club, and other clubs like that. And so I think as part of what they're doing is they're offering opportunities for students to join in addition to our After School Math Extra Help Center. So right, you're right. It's students who are choosing to go. We're not asking them to go to those clubs, but maybe it's just adding an additional layer with Teacher Extra Help and the mentoring program and the Academic Support Center. Maybe they're just other avenues. And also, I think supporting students who are interested in education piece as well. Maybe we can form those collaborative relationships, but maybe I'm not answering your question as pointedly as I needed to with that.
We can chat offline.
That sounds great.
So I really like this, the innovations you guys made actually to deliver the instruction materials. I would say our teacher has done an amazing job regarding this, try to visualize whatever to the concept to have the student capture the fundamental concepts and why this, why that. So my question is that teachers are not a magician, yeah. So, I mean, there's so much teachers can do about the innovation, about the classroom. Really, the crucial point is math is not it's rigorous, right? So it's kind of something need students practice, right? You need a lot of homework. I just wonder, does a student get enough homework? Get enough practice to help them understand the concept? It's, I just heard my elementary daughter, 6th grade, pretty much knows homework about the math. So I thought that's not a good way to learn mathematics.
So I can share with you particularly about the 6th grade and what I really like that IM has done with their homework in 6th grade, because we know that, yes, it is important to practice and that every time we recall something, we sort of strengthen that connection in our brain. But it's actually really important to have space between that practice. And so we know that mass practice, where we do like 50 of the same problem, is not as effective as to have spaced practice. And so you may or may not notice in your daughter's homework that in the 6th grade curriculum in particular, students will have 3 to 4 questions which are about the content that they just worked on that day. And then they have a couple, 2 or 3 more questions which are about content that they've covered previously in the year. And it'll tell them in the homework, this is from Unit 5, Lesson 12, so that if they don't remember how to do it, they can use their resources and go back and look at that. And so I love the fact that they're giving students opportunities to practice what they're working on now, and also to have that spaced practice, the opportunity to reconnect that neuron again and get the chance to practice that again.
I just wanted to ask one more question. So we know that the brain works very well when it's when it looks at contrasting things. So how much of the math curriculum, like, do you feel like is like, if you're teaching area, you know, teaching square, circle, rectangle, and you're kind of mixing in rather than just teaching, well, these are how you do this. You deal with squares for a while, then you go and you deal with circles for a while. And then so how much of have you seen in the changes where you start to, where students really are kind of able to compare and contrast different mathematics? Am I making sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe you can help me just kind of know how that, if that has changed, or.
So you want to talk? Yeah.
There's a mathematical routine that we do pretty often, which there's a few of them, but one of them, what do I notice, what do I wonder? And we start a lot of classes with that, or in the middle of a lesson, we'll just stop and say, what do you notice, what do you wonder? And have the kids tell us what they're comparing and they're contrasting. We also do which one doesn't belong, which is another one where they're doing a lot of comparing, contrasting. So we've worked those routines in pretty regularly into our practice.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. I don't see any more questions, and I really appreciate you taking your time.
I would just echo, I just want to thank the group for all of the work that you do every day. It's fantastic to see great concrete examples, and very much appreciated. So we're going to transition into, I think, budget presentation, right? I don't know if people want to stand up for a moment. after that, but feel free while we're transitioning into the next presentation.
All right, are we ready? You guys ready to get started? Okay. Turning it over to Peter. And
All
Dave.
right, so this
And Marie,
is,
sorry.
sorry, we have Peter, Dave, and Marie here. This is the second version of our preliminary budget. We're doing a second version because we really there's been some updates, but we're still working off the same general model here, working toward a recommended budget, but we want a little bit more feedback from you before we can give you a recommended version of this. I am going to just go at a very, very high level over what we're doing tonight and some of the slides that you've previously seen, just to make sure we're all refreshed. And so if there's people here who haven't seen prior budget presentations, they can come up to speed a little bit as well. So we are on our second presentation, and we're going to talk about some updates to the budget and some of the basic information we've already presented. We will discuss some of the selected personnel changes that you had requested to talk about, although that's slightly updated, as you'll see. We will share some initial thinking around capital planning and share some of the budget numbers there. And then we are hoping to get a discussion and feedback from you around all-day kindergarten and the direction you'd like to be going there. So that is the goal for tonight. We have not produced the line item budget at this point because we feel like we need some more information from you before we can go back and produce that. So that will come in a subsequent meeting. An action item that we want to be working toward, or two action items. One is going to be actually setting the all-day kindergarten tuition, and then the second is going to be a preliminary budget vote. And we would like to have at least both of those wrapped up by the 16th of February, so right before the vacation week. Again, just the big dates. Acton and Boxborough town meetings and how we work backwards to set the budget timeline. And I'm not spending time on this because we've already done it. At the highest level, we had projected increased expenses of, closing on, 5.5, almost going to $6 million. We had a net decrease in revenues, and we had about $2.67 million in the operating budget to increase to keep the Acton assessment at 3%, which left us with a budget gap of about $3 million, and that's what we've been working toward over the last couple of months. Last year's budget, FY23, or the current year budget, was just shy of $103 million. When we looked at the costs of all of our services moving forward that we currently have, it was $107 million. We then also had a number of items that were offset by grants currently that we'll have to incorporate, and or staffing positions that we need to incorporate to maintain services for students across the district. Those were $1.3 million. We had additional adjustments to revenue, non-personnel related adjustments, and personnel adjustments that made up the difference to what we're proposing preliminarily, which is a $105.8 million budget. And that's how we are closing that gap. That results in assessments to Acton of 2.99% and to Boxborough of 5.33%. The overall budget increase is 2.77%, and that's what we're holding at. Correct, Dave? So staffing, I'm going to go there first. This is a slide you've already seen. We are proposing to add 2 multi-language teachers, multilingual teachers. We are going to need that to meet minimum service delivery requirements for our multilingual learners. We knew we would have to make personnel reductions to manage the budget, so we've reduced 22.4 positions for a net change of a reduction of just over 20 positions. And that was as proposed at the last meeting. Quick breakdown by level, and either through attrition or actual staffing positions. We were able to do just over 9 of those positions through attrition, and 13 were through reductions of existing staff. And then as you look by level, we generally balanced it by enrollment, but there were some differences in that we had shared with you last time in terms of how we prioritized. This is just to remind you that we had created priority categories. One was looking at attrition. 2 was looking at ways we could create a smaller and more efficient district leadership or through administrative efficiencies. We looked hard at class sizes across the district to look at the school committee guidelines. And then, we still didn't have enough in reductions, so at that point we were into more impactful or programmatic reductions. As a reminder, these were the positions that we had reduced through attrition. I know I'm not going to have enough time to spend on this to go through each one. That's not the goal tonight, but just as a quick refresher, this was 9.2 positions through attrition. We had a total of 7.2 positions reduced from leadership. Of that, 4.2 we got to through attrition, and we had the equivalent of 3 additional positions that would have to be actual reductions in staff. When we looked at class sizes, we also made a series of reductions that we were able to maintain class sizes within the school committee guidelines. This was 5.8 positions. You'll see a couple of them were also from attrition. And then we looked at, other things when we knew we had to continue to make reductions, and we got into some areas, and while everything on the list was impactful, these were particularly impactful because they directly reduced programs that students would have for a variety of reasons that we talked about last time. This was 6.4 positions. So a couple of changes since our last meeting. We've had several individuals indicate that they are going to retire that we didn't know about at the time of the last meeting. Similarly, we have some people who are currently on leaves of absence who have decided not to return, who are higher on our salary scale. And so that when we rolled those dollar values into the personnel budget, it did free up some additional money where we were able to restore some of the positions from that last priority list. It didn't solve that whole priority list, but it did restore a number of the positions. So the positions that we have now restored back into the budget are those highlighted in green. So the 2 library media specialist positions at the elementary schools are now in the personnel budget. Similarly, the high school TV studio radio manager is in the budget now, as is the elementary first grade classroom and the high school counseling position. The junior high school health and phys ed position is still not in the budget. That's something we would like to see, and we'll talk to that a little bit in a couple of minutes. And then similarly, the senior seminar coordinator is not in the budget right now. I will say that high school counseling position that was reduced had a 0.4 wellness position attached to it that is not going to be used anyway next year. And it was 0.4 wellness, 0.6 direct service counseling to students. What we're looking at doing is thinking creatively about how that position might support the senior seminar work. And so we think we can be creative and still support senior seminar, making some adjustments to what that counseling position comes back looking like. So that's some work to be determined, but we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So of this last list, originally we had 6.4 positions in this. It's now 1.4 positions in that final priority category. So it certainly is progress in the right direction. I don't want to portray this as solving all of the challenges we've seen in the budget, but it's some positive progress. Just wanted to give a high-level update of what this means in terms of proposed personnel reductions. I wanted to just give you kind of the history of this. So when we look at reductions either through attrition or existing staff positions, we're still holding tight with attrition at 9.2 positions from the last two meetings, but we've gone from 13.2 additional positions that would need to be reduced down to 8.2. So some positive progress there. And the overall reductions to FTE go from 22.4 to 17.4. And then the chart below just shows you in green the areas where we've been able to make a positive impact, and the orange is where we have not been able to make that impact yet. I want to just share a little bit about each of these positions. So I'd like to invite, I think Joni and Jim are still here in the audience, and I do want to let them be able to say a couple words about these. They were gracious enough to have written some description that was in the memo about that. But I don't know, Joni or Jim, do you want to share a couple thoughts on either of these?
Hi, everyone. I put a quick memo in your packet. You know, if we were to reduce one health and phys ed teacher at the junior high, we'd move from a department of 5 to a department of 4. When we send kids off to PE and health, they do it as a whole team. So 104, 106, 108 kids go at a time. Right now, they're divided then into 5 sections. Class sizes around the 20, 21, 22 range. If we reduce to a department of 4, now we're at an average class size of 26, 27, 28. So that's significant for us. And if we do this, it will prevent us from continuing our model this year where we have 2 teams that are a little bit smaller to accommodate our Compass programming, where we made kind of teachers allowed to push into kind of support students in a different way. So we'll have an effect on the school as a whole if we do that. It is a proposed cut because we have a person retiring from that department. So it does save a person's position otherwise, and that's why it's still listed there.
I think Jim had indicated in the packet that, you know, if they didn't look at this, the only other place they had to really look was to maybe some special education assistants that were really needed for some student service delivery. So he was really in a tough position. I think there are a number of reasons why we didn't love this as a reduction. Class size is one, but I think curriculum is another. And maybe Deb, you can talk just for a moment about kind of what's going on in the health curriculum and how this would impact that.
Sure. So the last framework that the state gave us for health was from 1999. In 2018, they started to review a new health curriculum. Of course, it got stalled during COVID. We are expecting it out this spring for public comment, and they usually do a quick turnaround once public comment happens for us to be handed the new health curriculum. So it's going to be quite a bit of work to unpack all those standards and to figure out, you know, what programs and materials are out there, what kinds of curriculum we need to create, and then, you know, not having another health teacher at the junior high will also then require really prioritizing what we are teaching in the limited time that we have. So that's a concern from the curriculum side.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Deb. Joni can talk a little bit about the senior seminar coordinator. Again, these were the items that you requested that we give a little bit more detail on at your last meeting. So that's why we're highlighting these 3 positions.
Yeah, so I can just talk briefly about this position. First of all, the senior seminar program at the high school is really a signature program where seniors get to participate in internships in the second semester, and they have courses from the beginning of the year for a semester or in the second semester, and it's really an alternative type of program that's very engaging for many of our seniors in their last year of high school. And so cutting the coordinator position would require us to reallocate how we assign and acquire and kind of coordinate the internships, because the coordinator for that 0.4 position really works on that and helping us secure some really great internships and opportunities for our students, and it's a really great time for them in their senior year to do that. If the current teacher is to take that on, then we would have to reduce sections of that class from perhaps 4 sections to 2 sections, or maybe 4 to 3. Like Peter said, we're working creatively or hoping that we can incorporate some of that coordinatorship into the counseling position that we think we might be able to do, given the 0.6 and the 0.4 kind of addition, with the wellness coordinator not being part of what will be part of that job anymore. But the senior seminar program at the high school is really important, one that I think everyone would hate to lose. I think it's meaningful, especially for the seniors, especially now.
So is the senior seminar coordinator for a 1.0 FTE, or is that person performing other functions and then doing this as well?
The current senior seminar coordinator is, I believe, a 0.4 half-time position.
Half-time position.
So that's why we're thinking we can incorporate
Could be
it.
able to, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, and then, just talk briefly to the science curriculum. Oh, sorry. Yevon?
Question, so how many students are benefited from this? Just roughly.
We have 4 sections each semester, so I'd say about 150, 160 students total.
So I just want to rephrase what I said. So the person who is performing the coordination of the senior SEM is working half-time. There are other responsibilities that we've had to move into the stipend budget around advising some clubs and that kind of thing. So it was kind of a pro and con financially, but just the position is being done by someone working half-time.
I want to talk to the, science curriculum coordinator position. I will say, a staple of Acton-Boxborough for, several decades has been having curriculum coordinators in each of those major content areas at the elementary school. And our science curriculum coordinator has done an incredible amount of work in terms of helping to rethink kind of the current science investigations at the elementary school level with the release of the new standards. And, certainly I want to credit the individual in that position with a lot of that work, because it's been good work for the district. This was a difficult decision, and it's one that I recommended forward because when we looked at how we've added positions over the last several years, one of the largest areas outside special education where we've added positions was in the curriculum area. And a strategic move that we've made in the last several years was to really think about coaching in the schools, as well as having some specialists in schools. And I'll talk, I think as we've built that out, it certainly has really been proving its value, particularly over the last couple of years, where we're starting to gain traction in that program with our educators, and our educators are starting to feel that we're gaining some positive momentum in that regard. When we thought about what we wanted to prioritize, it was a hard decision we made, but we wanted to prioritize the staff who were working directly with educators in school every day. And it doesn't mean that this is not an important position to the district. It certainly means that we're not going to be able to do the work we do in the same way. But again, when we looked at what we've added over the last several years and having to make some hard decisions around reductions, we did say we wanted to prioritize that work in the schools every day. And so wanted to provide that context, but I want Deb to be able to talk to maybe the impact of that and what that means in terms of how curricular coordination works.
Sure. So to Peter's point, for many years we have had some curriculum coordinators in each of the discipline areas. Before that, there was only one person in the district, and that was a science coordinator specialist. And often that's because in districts, science is one of the more challenging subjects to teach, especially at the elementary level. There are 3 different components to science teaching: earth science, physical science, biology. And it's a lot of content for educators at each grade level. So having someone at the district level with that content background is really helpful when it comes to creating curriculum, looking at materials, and leading professional learning, which is a lot of what this person has done and this role has done. When new frameworks are rolled out, and in fact, we created all of our own investigations for science, and that transition period over several years. Having someone in that role, though, enables us to look at the curriculum with fresh eyes each year, to think about incorporating the UDL principles, incorporating some of the SEL practices, making sure that the vocabulary is accessible for our students, and all the different ways that we can support some of our multilingual students. So there's always curricular ongoing needs, even though the investigations have been created. The other impact that this will have are the relationships that are built with community partners. And we know that for part of our STEAM work, that's really important to have community partners, especially when we're thinking about authentic audiences. So relationships with the Discovery Museum, the Acton Garden Club, the Acton Natural Resources and Sustainability Departments, collaboration and partnerships with educational nonprofits that we've had in the past, with grants as well, with Turk and the Concord Consortium, and being part of some of the research that they do. We've also had some terrific collaborations with higher education institutions like Boston College and their Geosciences department. One of their professors comes and works with our students in their classes. We've worked with the Leslie STEAM Lab for the Learning Lab to be able to kick off a lot of our STEAM learning. So those partnerships take time to develop, and there will be an impact on building those relationships. There's also some internal relationships, so that person working really closely with our energy advisor and some of our school-based green teams, designing some of the things that were at the Boardwalk School at the very beginning of the project, as well as, again, continuing to offer some place-based and social justice professional learning workshops around science. There's a lot of equity work happening in science right now, and it's really exciting. And then learning what the Department of Ed and making connections to the Department of Ed and how they're seeing this work. That will be a challenge to continue with the loss of this position. And then just lastly, we learned just yesterday that the state is rolling out in the next several years new science, technology, and engineering MCAS tests for grades 5 and 8, and that'll happen in the next couple of years. So really, what do those new tests look like? How can we support the teaching in science? And then supporting our teachers and our students to be able to take those tests. So those are just some of the impacts.
So that, again, we wanted to come back to you with information about these. Each has value, and I think if we had a budget that, could sustain various positions, we'd be doing that. And unfortunately, we're in a position where we do have to make some challenging choices right now. And so that's where we're still at. And we're kind of holding with these three as reductions in the budget.
Do you have any questions about anything so far? Okay.
So before Peter goes to the next slide and we get into numbers, just a quick preamble. This year, I've taken on the additional role of Director of Operations, and we've had a number of unforeseen challenges. Things crop up that we've had to deal with on an emergency basis. It's colored what we've done as far as pursuing the existing CIP, the Capital Improvement Program plan. Two big things that come to mind. We had to make compliant the access and egress to the Conant Modular Building this year in order to obtain a certificate of occupancy for that building. That was a significant cost. We've also had to repair a sinkhole that developed at Leary Field, which was minimally covered by insurance and most of which covered by budget money. Neither of those were in the CIP plan. And in looking at the items that were supposed to be addressed in FY23, we found ourselves scrambling to get the buildings opened and occupied with the proper certificates in hand. And so by the time we come to school opening, we've missed a window of opportunity to get some things accomplished that were in the plan. So we took stock, and between looking at what was in the plan and then, as you'll see in a couple of minutes, some of the things that came to us that we can't overlook, we are looking to reassess and revisit what your capital improvement plan looks like over the next couple of years. Preamble finished. So the first thing is, what do we have available through FY24 for resources to spend on capital? We expect the CIP fund balance, which is a revolving fund, to have about $1.3 million at the end of this year. The capital stabilization fund should be about $700,000, so about $2 million there, plus next year's capital appropriation, which is in your preliminary budget. So about $2.7 million of funding sources for capital projects through FY24. One of the things that was on the plan that we did pursue this year was a reevaluation of the existing CIP plan, and a company by the name of Bureau Veritas is doing the work as we speak. We expect them to be concluded with their field work. The original plan was by the end of this month, which is next week. They will discuss some of their findings orally, and they'll deliver a report sometime in March. The needs that we're going to talk about are based on a combination of what's in the current plan and some unanticipated, and by unanticipated means they're not in the current CIP, but as I think you'll see that they are such magnitude as far as priority that we need to find a way to pursue those projects. And the last one is all of the projects that you see now on this page, every one of them is in a stage of development as far as getting engineers or other professionals to evaluate the scope and cost of these projects. So I'll quickly go down them. There are 6. You have probably heard Peter talk about the need to upgrade our phone system. The new Boardwalk campus was outfitted with the backbone that's required to replace the system. Blanchard was updated last year with ARPA funding. The rest of the district is not compliant, and it's something that needs to be done ASAP, not in the current CIP plan. And the projected cost is as you see. These are in Dave's priority order for what it's worth. So I'm going to take the 2nd and 6th one now and talk about both of them. These are the rooftop units for HVAC and chillers for air conditioning for the high school, the 2nd line there, and the Parker Damon building, the 6th line. We have engineering estimates that talk about, that quantify our costs to be $2.4 million and $1.5 million respectively, and those numbers are net of a 30% rebate that we believe we would qualify for if we pursue those projects. The systems are badly outdated. Both of those were in the CIP plan. They were both underfunded with respect to the dollar values that were in the plan though. So we have updated those costs. We'll continue to refine them as we get more information, but that's the best info we have at this point.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I would also add, with both of those mechanical system, the rooftop unit projects that are on the list, those were in the CIP. We have done a life cycle analysis on full electrification at the high school, and that's complete, which would save several $1 million over the lifespan of the new units, from maintaining fossil fuel units to moving to electrical. We're in the process of doing the same life cycle analysis for Parker Damon building. We also think these are opportune projects because the federal government, with the most recent legislation, has created very significant rebate programs for municipalities to go to pursue electrification. It's also in line with the electrification plan that the district and town of Acton jointly developed, and it would accelerate that plan significantly. So I think, one of the reasons that we want to think about this is to leverage the opportunity for those federal rebates so that we're not paying full price. And is in addition to just being good environmental stewards for the district and having, a long-term plan to have functioning heat at all of our schools, which is important as well.
So basically, in layman terms, those number 2 and number 6, if we did do them, we will get some money back from the government. So we're gonna have some gain. So that 7 million probably will go down.
No, so it's actually the opposite. So say just the second item there, the 2.4 million, it's actually about 3.5 million to do the rooftop units at the high school. Based on, the life cycle analysis we did, but we would get about $1 million of it back to lower the cost to 2.4 net. So the numbers on this sheet are the actual district costs as opposed to the rebates have already been taken off the top.
Through the chair to Peter. Quick question, does that include the heat pump rebate program through Mass Saves also? My assumption is you're looking at heat pumps as opposed to traditional HVAC and no. Okay.
This is retrofitting the existing units which are outdated with new units, in some cases replacing gas-fired with electric, in some cases replacing electric with electric, but
okay.
all electric units going forward.
Okay, and then secondly, knowing how bad the supply chain is currently and dealing with trying to get capital items where I work right now, even if this is included within the FY24 CIP, or if you're projecting in FY24, what's the reality of these projects being completed, and could this be rolled out into 25?
There's about 5 or 6 slides total here. We'll get to timing. Okay? And hold the thought about heat pumps, not for this presentation, but for the Boardwalk campus, definitely. There's great opportunity there. Admin.
You want to let Becca?
I'm sorry.
I want to talk a little bit about the ceiling replacement containing asbestos materials at Conant.
We'll get there.
Is that the next?
We just haven't.
Okay.
Sorry.
I just didn't want to repeat myself when I got to item 6, and I just took 2 and 6 and put them together. And the reason, just so you know, well, Dave, why didn't you put them together? The high school, the background work for the high school work is at a more advanced stage than is the Parker Damon work. That's why I put them in this order. So back to the third item then, the admin roof. We could take you on a quick tour and show you the various receptacles that are being used, not to recycle water like it's being done in a positive manner at the Boardwalk campus, but just because it's coming in from the leaky sieve-like ceiling in this building. I don't know how old it is, but it's way past its useful life. Because it's predominantly administrative building, it would not ever be eligible for MSBA funding, and that's the current projected cost, but we have an engineer that is looking at a scope and cost estimate. And I'll skip again to Blanchard and say pretty much similar, not as egregiously bad as this building. It was on the and the admin roof replacement project was not on the CIP plan previously. The Blanchard roof replacement was on the plan, but MSBA has suspended its accelerated repair program. And so putting it on, and indefinitely as I understand it. And so we're putting this forward as a means of replacing the Blanchard roof in a more timely fashion. Skipping back now to the ceiling replacement at Conant. So these are ceiling tiles, not of the vintage that you see here, but somewhat older, and they have asbestos-containing materials in them. The district files a report with the appropriate action steps and inspections of all asbestos-containing materials in the district. These have been okay, but the ceiling tiles are showing enough wear that we've had an engineer come in and say that they ought to be systematically removed. It's a big undertaking to remove any asbestos-containing materials, as you probably are aware. The $600,000 cost was his initial estimate of them being done in a systematic manner over 5 years' time. We are of the opinion, and we just met with that engineer this week, he is going back to, we're going to prepare a scope and put a bid out on the street to do that work this summer, to do it all this summer. We expect that, versus over a 5-year period of time, we expect that $600,000 cost will come down significantly if firms such as this need to only mobilize once versus 5 times over a 5-year period of time. And so those are the 6 items that we have identified. And again, the Conant ceiling was not on the original CIP plan. You've got 3 single asterisks on there. 3 out of 6 were not on the original CIP plan. The others, the mechanical systems at both buildings were. They were, I think I'm going to talk about the existing time frame, I will. They were on the plan, and the Blanchard roof replacement was on the CIP plan with a caveat, if approved by MSBA with attendant reimbursement subsidy.
Becca, did that answer your question about the Conant?
It did. I was going to say, I wanted to know what the ETA was on that because, not to fearmonger, but it's something that should be taken care of as soon as possible. My, I guess, lingering question is, I guess I'm surprised there's no state or federal funding to help remove some of those materials from schools. That's really disappointing.
And you could have dealt with it way back when, or monitored, inspected on a 6-month basis, and deal with it down the line, and the line is, we're at that spot in the line.
Can I just ask a quick ARPA question, since you referenced it in terms of the Blanchard phone system, because this came up at BLF last night. Can you just refresh my memory where we are with the ARPA funds from the 2 towns? Because it came up as a big question, which I can explain to you offline. But we did get some ARPA funds from the towns, and that was part of, I just don't remember.
We received in FY22 $1 million from Acton. Acton has committed a second $1 million for FY23, which was initially 500 this year, 500 next year. It's been consolidated, another $1 million. Acton. Boxborough has committed $375,000. We haven't seen any yet. We've anticipated in next year's budget $250,000 or 2/3 of that, holding off $125,000 or 1/3 for the following year.
Super helpful. Thank you.
So the $7 million on the previous slide is, we had math earlier. We can do the math, but all we need to know, it's significantly more than the $2.7 million of funding available through FY24. So given that particular, we're intended to be multi-year projects in the CIP. plan, I looked at what are we going to have as far as capital funding for 3 years out. And so when we add FY25 and 26 appropriations per the funding plan, we've now got a war chest, if you will, of $4.4 million, which is a little bit closer to $7 million, but still significantly short of being able to do all those projects with available funding. And so we have known for a while, because of the project, the Douglas Gates project budget coming in, the bids coming in less than estimated, that there was a savings in that project. The appropriation for the project was a little over $117 million. The project budget that Skanska is managing is $114 million. So there's about $3.2 million of savings from that project that we are talking with our financial advisors about the wisdom of repurposing that appropriation to other capital projects. As I understand it, that is able to be done with the respective approval of both town meetings, and as long as the new purpose is of a similar useful life as the original purpose of the appropriation. Well, if we're talking about primarily roofs, rooftop units, and asbestos abatement on ceilings, those things, in my view, qualify. And even if they don't, there are other things in the plan that certainly would qualify. Adding that to our existing funding sources now puts us over what we would need to fund all of those priority projects.
Just to note on that, so to be really clear, you know, we have an initial bond that we took out on the building project for $75 million, correct?
We took out a bond of $75 million.
Right. We will.
3 years ago, correct?
Yep, 3 years ago. We knew that wasn't going to be the total borrowing that we needed for this building. We did about 90% of what we needed. We will still have to bond about $3 million to pay for the total project budget of 114. So we have a $3 million bond that we're going to have to issue in the next 6 to 12 months, I would anticipate.
Specifically to finish the Douglas Gates project.
Correct. In addition to that, there is a $3 million additional surplus of that between the project budget of 114 and what the towns originally voted to appropriate for the new building at 117. So what we would like to do is, rather than just bonding the $3 million we need, bond an additional $3 million on top, so a total of $6 million that would allow us to finish borrowing for the building and repurpose that debt to accelerate the rest of this capital work and provide the funding for it. That would require authorization from both towns at town meetings. We know that there's some steps we need to do between now and then, but we have submitted placeholders to both towns for the warrant articles so that this is on their radar and they're holding a warrant article for this. And then we know we want to start by putting this onto your radar for discussion purposes, but then we also have some additional steps that we want to do. So I'll go to some recommendations that we have based on the needs that we see as really high priority. We think we have to recommend keeping the current level of funding for capital. Additionally, I think a next step would be to convene the capital subcommittee that we formed several years ago and the debt strategy subcommittee to start talking about the projects that need to be done, as well as really looking at bonding mechanisms and starting to engage different stakeholders in the community and an understanding and awareness of the needs that the district has in this area and why we might want to repurpose some of that debt. I think as well, we have not yet received that updated CIP from Bureau Veritas. We know that's in process. all of the projects that we have on this list are our best understanding of projects that we need to do as of today. We have asked Bureau Veritas to go around and verify some of these projects and make sure that our understanding of the needs is what they're seeing as well. They will probably not pick up on the telephone system, but based on, you know, the letter I receive every 3 months from the state telling me we have to upgrade that phone system, I think that needs to be on this list. So, you know, there's other sources of information besides Bureau Veritas, but they are also working on this. So we have to be a little bit flexible in what we commit to right now in capital funding until we actually see their report come in, because that's why we hired them. So those are our 3 recommendations as it sits now around capital, but we wanted to provide that information before we discuss all-day kindergarten because, you know, I know we're struggling to try and do everything that we want to do in this budget, and there's just too many pieces that we're trying to fit into too small of a space. So that's the capital portion of tonight's presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Let me just add one other thing. If we're looking at a significant additional investment and looking to borrow additional funds. What does that look like, Dave? What tax impact, assessment impact? That's beyond the scope of what we wanted to talk about tonight. We wanted to present the priority items that we feel are essential to look at in the near term, and then lay out what comes next, which is to get the other related subcommittees involved to kind of strategize how best to move forward. Thank you.
So questions? Ben?
This may be a foolish question, but are we using any sort of pay-go money in terms of savings from operational costs from this year and repurposing that to capital to offset any of the capital costs?
Savings from this year, I'm not going to assume are available until free cash is certified, or certainly not till the end of the year. So I would say no. Not a prudent thing anyway, Ben.
Just a thought.
Other questions? We have someone in the audience, so anyone else from the committee? Yeah, Ben.
So this is our major items. I saw a long list of the capital CIP, project we still needed to do, right? So work on. That's only the big items, right? So the other is probably easily still could have go up to a few $100,000, right? $100,000, right? So I added them together, probably was still accumulate up to $1 million at least, right? That's my impression.
This takes the lion's share of what was in the original CIP plan through FY27 and just puts it all. It doesn't do it all this year. We would like to get the ACM abatement at Conan done right away. We'd like to get the roof started. It doesn't do all 6 of those projects in the upcoming summer, but it pulls them forward from a priority standpoint and starts focusing on when are we going to get them done, what kind of phasing do we need to approach them, and certainly if this plan goes through, have the resources to be able to get it done. And still, again, these are preliminary cost estimates. We think some have more polish to them than others at this point in time. We think they're pretty close, and there is a bit of a gap between the cost and the amount of funds that would be available in this plan, to the tune of a little over $100,000 a year if you annualize it over 4 years.
Anyone else? John, you want to come up?
John Peterson, 6 Jackson Drive. Yeah. First of all, let me enthusiastically support the idea of town warrant including a bonding item, which both covers the incremental cost for the Boardwalk campus and covers this additional capital. To your point, of course, the numbers aren't final, but it's clear that bringing forward a bond, in the range of, $7 million or so, it would be, a great thing and an appropriate thing because they're capital items. It makes sense to bond them. So I think the only sad part of that is that interest rates aren't quite as favorable as they were for the previous flotation. So having, thank you for that wonderful suggestion. Now let me make a few other comments. One is the district owns 1 million square feet of buildings. That's a lot to keep track of. I'm supportive of the idea that there need not be a facility position in the central office, but to think that it's a part-time job to manage the 1 million square feet and to handle the logistics of these large projects, I'm very concerned that you will spend more money than you will save, through the personnel. So I hope that as you go forward, somewhere embedded in the organization will be the expertise to make sure that maintenance, on that 1 million square feet is appropriate, and that we can oversee the various capital activities that we're doing. And then the last thing I want to say generally, so the administration has done a good job of getting packets out on Friday. But when those packets don't include things like this, then what happens is you get exactly the questions that are on the slide following. And so that really doesn't help the discussion. So, I would strongly encourage everybody who's working on getting things ready for packets to put enough material in the packet so that some of the obvious questions that are going to arise can be addressed by pre-reading.
Okay, thank you. Move on.
Okay, we're going to, we did a little preliminary on the all-day K at, 10 o'clock at your last meeting. So we're going to go into it in a little more detail, and we're hoping at either next week's meeting or the one after, you'll be able to vote a tuition rate for next year, because we are in the process of enrolling. I'm not really even talking about this slide yet, but we're in the process of enrolling students, and families need to make their decisions in March. So, this, I wanted to just sort of give you a little bit of background on our road to this point. The school committee and the district have been committed for several years to moving to a place where there is no tuition for all-day kindergarten. A lot of things have changed in the last 4 or 5 years, you might know. So I wanted to start sort of, where were we in 2019? And did we think we were going to be able to get to tuition-free all-day kindergarten? And we came up with a plan, and it was somewhat aggressive, and it was based on finances and projections in 2019. So at that time, the kindergarten costs that were being paid for through tuition were roughly $1 million. And so the plan was to, and the tuition at that time was $4,500 per year per student for all-day kindergarten. And we had a number of kids in half-day and number of kids in all-day. The plan was to reduce tuition by $750 each year until we got to zero. And the way we were going to get there was we were going to put $200,000 each year into the budget. I think it was for 6 or 7 years. And we were going to use $1.2 million out of your reserves, your E&D account, again, over that period of time to get to zero. So then COVID happened. So we were able to go from $4,500 a year per student to $3,750 per year per student. Then we didn't even have all-day kindergarten the year after COVID started, of course. And so last year we were at $3,750. And then we knew about the ARPA money. So we revised the plan with projections for ARPA. And at that time, the remaining costs for this year were projected to be $721,000. And so we went with $1,800 tuition for 3 years. And after the third year, we could get to zero if we could add 180,000 per year. I left out the number. I think it was for, we were going to add the 180,000 for 6 or 7 years, and we were going to use $500,000 in ARPA. So that was what we had planned, and now we've done the FY24 budget, and the projected expenses for next year are $570,000. All right, so that's just the overview of how we got here. And then the next slide shows you just sort of year by year the tuition, just the tuition. So the plan we made in 2019, the plan as we revised it a year ago, and now what are we going to do for next year? So this year, 2022, 2023, tuition's at $1,800. So we need to talk about what tuition's going to be for the next few years. And the next slide, this was just a little more detail about it, the amount that was going to be added to the budget. So this is the plan we talked about a year ago. And so then the next slide shows you what changed. These slides were in your packet last time. We had originally thought we could use $500,000 of ARPA. We've used $400,000 of ARPA. So there's $100,000 that we're not using, partly because we used a chunk of ARPA last year for tuition, and partly because that additional $100,000 was part of asking, going back to the towns for more, and that $100,000 didn't come through. That would have been beyond the $2 million that Acton gave us and the $375 that Boxborough gave us. The other thing that happened is the budget. So for the FY24 budget, we had originally projected we would put $180,000 in. We have not put that in. That's the bad news. But the good news is we thought the expenses were going to be higher this year. So this is just kind of how I briefly explained it last meeting. So now, if we go to the next slide, what options do we have? Can we get some funding sources from either the state or our legislators or any other revenue sources? We could increase tuition. We don't want to. We could further reduce staff. But basically, we didn't have as much money come in, and we weren't able to put the money in the budget for next year that we had hoped to put in. And the idea that we're going to be able to put 180 or 200,000 in every year going forward until we get it fully funded doesn't look too realistic right now with our budget situation. So the next slide. So just to kind of encapsulate where we are, if you left the tuition at $1,800 for next year, we're projecting that expenses would outpace revenues by about $100,000. And we could do that, but if we do that, it just prolongs the number of years we have to charge tuition, and it prolongs the number of years we have to increase the budget. So those are sort of the levers we have to work with. So what we're suggesting right now is that we go with a $2,250 tuition for next year. A year from now, you'll have a lot more information around students and costs and what the following year budget looks like and whether, how much you can put in. But I've played with all the different levers. And if you went to $2,250 for a number of years, you'd have to charge tuition at that level for 5 years. You'd have to add $100,000 to the budget each year for 9 years. But somewhere in that window, something's going to get better around, or at least we hope, around either Chapter 70 funding, us getting to a place where the hold harmless changes and we get more revenue that way. Enrollment is just hard to know, but so that's just the lay of the land. All that was kind of background to get you to a place where if you keep it at 1,800 for next year, you can do that. That brings down the fund balance by 100,000, and the following year you're in a deficit. So it really means you have to keep tuition going longer. And we're at a point, so we have gone from $1 million of expenses to be covered. Now we're just under 600,000. So the remaining expenses to be covered is 600,000 plus the annual cost of living. So that's just kind of the lay of the land. So we're recommending at our next meeting that you consider a $2,250 tuition. The ARPA, that money is available and committed. Those are just the years that it's going in. But next year, we have roughly 600,000 to be covered. And with a $2,250 tuition, you pretty much break even instead of taking money out of fund balance that will then make it harder to get there in the long run.
For what it's worth, the original plan called for a reduction by $750 a year. So if you look at the tuition column, FY22 was $3,750. Take $750 out of that would have been $3,000. Take $750 out of that is $2,250, which is what the proposal is. So arguably, this proposal for FY24 is the same, is reverting back to the original plan, admittedly just for FY24, but I think that's how we even settled on that number.
Yeah, comments, Ginny?
Thank you. I just want to start with a little bit of a correction in that Acton and Boxborough didn't give us ARPA funds. They were the holders of ARPA funds just due to the vagaries of how that money was distributed. So, you know, as the one of the major budget drivers for our communities, that's money that the towns don't own to give to us. And I just say that because I hear that a lot, and it makes me crazy because, you know, under other, you know, configurations of local government, the school district would have received that money directly. I'm really concerned about what happened to the $100,000 of ARPA funds that disappeared. I noticed that in the packet. I noted that it was on page 12. I'm very unclear about, I think it said in the packet, the district did not receive the final ARPA allocation of $100,000. And you just said it didn't come through, so I don't understand that. Then the other thing I just want to understand, because I'm confused about it, is as long as we charge tuition for all-day kindergarten, it's my understanding that we're also going to have a half-day option for families who cannot or don't wish to pay to send their kids to public school in the town in which they pay taxes. So, you know, given that, I think it's very important for everybody to understand the impact this has on programming in terms of specials, because, you know, where half the kids get sent home for the second half of the day because they're in half-day kindergarten, which lasts under 3 hours. They can't fit in the quote-unquote specials. So I just want to have an understanding around how long we're going to have or offer half-day kindergarten, and no matter how small that pool of families gets, my understanding is that currently it impacts 100% of our kindergartners because of the way that you have to, you know, I think you understand what I'm saying. It's late, so if you could just respond to that, if you know the answer tonight. Otherwise, we could leave it for a future meeting.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to both of those. The $100,000, and Dave can correct me if I'm wrong, that when we say we didn't receive that $100,000, it was money we had requested but was never approved. So
By the towns.
Right, we had, I forget the total amount that we had requested from Town of Acton. I think it might have been 2.25 or 2.5 million total. They gave us 2 of that, and so we couldn't fund all of the requests that we originally put in. So we had a placeholder for that $100,000, but have had to take it out because it was not approved money.
Okay.
So it's not like they said they'd give it to us and then didn't. It didn't get approved in the original batch.
Okay. So why are we just learning that now, or do we already know that? Okay. So. Okay.
No, we knew that, and that I believe was in probably last year's information when they voted it.
Okay, because it was in our packet. So was it just because that was part of our plan before and now?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, you know, in terms of kindergarten programming, and I'll let Deb talk to this too, but, you know, we've moved to a scholarship program where students who have financial need, we will bring into the all-day K program tuition free. And so when we did that, we've actually moved more to a full-day kindergarten program from how we plan curricularly and how we plan specials, knowing that, you know, the students with the financial need we're taking care of, whereas students who elect not to, they may miss specials here and there, but it's a choice for that half-day program. That's not a perfect system, but it's, you know, we felt like we needed to offer a full-day curriculum at this point.
Okay, so that's helpful because I think that there's a lot of confusion around that, and maybe I just haven't been keeping up with that. But would you say, or would Deb say, that our all-day kindergarten programming is unaffected by the fact that we don't have universal all-day kindergarten?
No, I think ideally from a programming standpoint, and Deb can talk to this, we would rather have all of our students with us for the full day because there is a level of disruption when there's a group of students who would leave every day, at that time, and they're missing different things each day. We believe it would be better for all students certainly to have all-day kindergarten. That's been our goal, at least since I've been here. We just haven't figured out the financial way to get there. And Deb, I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Absolutely. I mean, the disruption is children are leaving and then it happens at different times of the year. I think we're down to a very small number of students at this point, maybe even a handful who are leaving half day for various reasons, but for, the student themselves and then for the teacher thinking about what the student missed and trying to, catch that up. It is disruptive. It'll also give us an opportunity once we have full day for everyone to think programmatically a little bit differently. So it is something that we contend with the half-day piece.
Okay, wait, Ginny, let me see other questions and we come back.
Sorry.
Any other yeah, Rebecca.
Wait, can I just answer one more part of the, just one more detail for that? We've been very careful to work as closely as we can with all of our families around scholarships and make them available wherever they're needed. We started the year with 22, we have about 300 kindergartners. We started the year with 22 students in half-day K, and we're down to 11. And we do still have some families who really prefer half-day, but when we started, that's the difference the funding that you've all provided has made, is that it's available to everybody who wants it.
Thank you. It's great to know. Rebecca.
I just want to speak to how frustrating it is to have made a commitment to a certain price and not be able to stick to it. I think that sends a really bad message to people to not have something they can expect. And I know that this budget season is not something any of us wanted, but considering, you know, our projections, it looked like we were going to be able to do this, and now we can't. It doesn't seem like we're really able to look forward that much. And we do have some reason to feel a little bit optimistic about looking forward. So I would be one to advocate for keeping it at the 1,800 and hope for the best. But I also want to ask about the scholarships, because personally, when I was going through the kindergarten process, I didn't see any information about it. And this was only a couple years ago. Are scholarships capped, or is it everybody who applies and needs it gets one? And also, how can people apply? Where is that information?
So the information's always been available. I'm not sure, I can't speak to your specific experience. It's on everything we send out. I don't know, it's part of the presentation to all families. It's part of what comes out in email. And we send it out multiple times a year. We have principals send it out again. I think one of the reasons might be, it's part of the application for sure. And then once we get everybody in and we've applied the scholarships to everybody who requested it, then we continue to reach out to any half-day families after that throughout the year to make sure that they know that this is available.
Back to the programmatic part, because we talked about that a lot a couple years ago when we first made this commitment, and you said two sort of different things. So are we offering what I would consider to be a full day program, or we're offering the things that are part of a full day?
Right now, we're offering things that are part of a full day. I mean, we need to think more comprehensively of what a full day program would look like.
But this affects, like, if we don't move, every year that we don't move to offering free full day kindergarten, we're not doing that.
Well, we're pretty close now. I mean, with those numbers, it really gives us an opportunity this summer and to start thinking about that really full day programming. You know, we want to make sure that the disruption that was happening for some students and some families, that teachers would also be able to create something that was cohesive. And so I think we're at the place where now with numbers that we can go ahead and do that. It's not happening.
Because that's the piece of it that matters. I mean, I would like to have no tuition, but that is the piece of it that matters to me as an educator, is like offering a half day over the course of a full day is a waste. And so that's what I wanted to know. Like, if this isn't if we're able to keep the numbers low enough to only the kids that really truly want a half day for whatever philosophical reason their family has, I just want to make sure that we're not denying the vast majority of the kids who are in school what an actual full day comprehensive curriculum looks like. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I have really two questions. I'd like, Murray, if you could expand a little bit more as to the number of families that are in half-day K, and also a question about the additional revenue opportunities we can find and where we can go about making up for this. So first, you'd mentioned 11. What did you mean by that?
There are 11 students in half-day kindergarten out of 300.
Across the district?
Across the district,
Okay.
yep.
Well, cool. And then David and Peter, regarding the sources of additional revenue to be able to offset that 100,000 or 700,000, what recourse do we have to find those? Have we identified this? What's been done in that respect?
I don't have an answer, Andrew. I do believe that information has been presented to our legislators about trying to free up funding for this purpose. I don't see that on the chart yet.
Yeah, we've spoken with legislators about this purpose. I know Ginny's been in close contact with all of the legislators. You know, I think that one of the better options, I don't think just Acton-Boxborough would ever get a specific earmark to be able to move toward tuition free. I don't think, when the state looks at equity in the big picture of things, Acton-Boxborough is not going to rise to the top of the list alone. However, there are some other communities as well who I think have been trying to move toward all-day K. I think, best bet for any state revenue is probably partnering up, and I think Ginny's tried to do some of that connecting work already. That's one. I don't think there's any other just grants that we're going to find that will magically get us there. I think it's probably going to be after something that, the state chooses to help us with. To be able to overcome that hurdle. It's frustrating because at the same time we're trying to do this, a number of other communities are now doing community needs assessment around universal pre-K. And so we're trying to catch up to universal K, but we're, a whole program behind, I think, at this point.
Thank you. So I just try to understand the number here. So from 2022 to 2023, we have the tuition is 1,800, and I guess the expenses covered by tuition, that's 721,000. That's all funded by $1,800, right? Tuition.
It's funded by the $1,800 tuition and the ARPA money that we received.
Okay. Then, okay.
Okay.
Then my problem goes.
So there's one reason why this is confusing. The 200,000, the two 200,000s really sort of came in the year before. So I guess I could redo this chart with the money back a year because it has to do with how it got distributed. There isn't going to be more money in next year to put toward the 597,000. So we'll put this slide back in for the budget workshop we do in a couple weeks, and I'll move the 200,000s up because that money is gone now, and that was part of how we paid for last year and this year. Okay, so I do think that's confusing.
Evelyn and then Ben.
So for kids that do a half day, do they have a reduced fee or are they still, or they don't pay anything?
Right.
So it's the folks that are quote unquote full day that have to pay this amount? Okay.
Yep, so the students who go full day this year, either their families pay $1,800 or their tuition is paid for due to financial need.
Okay. But to Rebecca's point though, last year this time when we were discussing this, we projected here that for the next 2 to 3 years, we're gonna have families pay $1,800. And I know we're in a really difficult budget season, but I have to agree with what Rebecca is saying. It's we're almost taking back our words to families to say that, now we're gonna go back and increase fees. I think we settled on the fact that we would inching towards sort of a free all-day K at some point. And I know that we have some budget issues and some constraints, but it will be difficult for me personally to support an increase when I sat here and voted and showed projected it here that in the next 3 years, this is what we were expecting families to pay. It's almost like we're going back on our words, and I personally can see how I'm gonna support something like this.
Yeah, I think, if we want to keep tuition the same, that's certainly something we're happy to explore. I think from a funding mechanism, and Marie, you'd have to correct me, I know it would at least require finding another $180,000 somewhere in the budget, but I believe it's also possibly another $100,000 on top for the $100,000 of ARPA we didn't receive. Or is it $180,000?
That's what it was before we really did the budget. So you could leave it at 1,800 for another year. The issue with it is longer term. So if there are a few pieces to it. So you could leave it at 1,800 for another year, absolutely. There is, when I talk about fund balance, the tuition that has come in, there's some money in an account that rolls forward. That money right now I have the exact balance, but I can't find the tab right this second. But basically, I think it had something like $184,000 balance. If you keep it at 1,800 with what we know about the number of students coming in next year, we would project that 184,000 to go down 100,000. And so that would leave 84,000. That gets you through next year. The problem is that was what was going to pay for the out years when you went to zero. So you can do one more year at 1,800 and we can balance the budget.
To see what next year brings, right? I think at this point, we'll probably have to do it year by year. I would be, we have to do it year by year. But can you remind me how many kids we're projecting to be enrolled in all-day K this year?
So next year, we're on track to have about the same number of kindergartners we have this year, so about 300 total kindergartners. Okay. And somewhere between 280 and 290 would be in all-day K. And again, families sign up, families are paying, everyone has different ability to pay. If we're charging 1,800, the way it worked out this year, we covered scholarships for families that needed them, and there are now 11 kids still in half day. There were 20, 25, I think I said 22 at the beginning of the year. And I was thinking a little more about Rebecca's question. Some of the qualifying for scholarship is automatic, and you don't have to apply at all. And for the people who do apply, we keep it as simple as we can. But anyone who qualifies for any federal or state, there are many financial programs. They come through to us automatically, and they automatically will get an all-day kindergarten scholarship. So they don't have to do anything to apply.
Just to follow up on that, though, I can just speak for myself. Then I should have gotten free kindergarten, and I was never offered it. So I'm just worried that people are falling through the cracks, that's all.
Okay, so to be specific, families who qualify for free and reduced lunch will get all-day kindergarten. Families who are on, okay. So it maybe wasn't so automatic before. What we do is when you register, when you go into Power School, there's a question that says, if you qualify for free and reduced lunch, do you agree to have your name shared for purposes such as free fees, that kind of thing? People who check that box, we give them scholarships. And maybe that wasn't in place a couple years ago, I don't know. Like to some extent, the rules have changed and that kind of thing.
Two questions. First, if we keep the tuition at $1,800 for next year, does that prolong us in terms of getting to all-day K for free?
Yeah.
So I think what I'd like to do is actually come back to the committee with maybe a couple of multi-year financial models. One that looks at keeping, $1,800 tuition in place. What does that look like over the next 5 to 7 years? And what's the impact of that financially? How do the revenues and expenses flow as we can currently project them to the best of our ability. And a second model being, if we raise the tuition to $22.50, what does that do? But have a couple models for the basis of comparison, because I am 100% philosophically in agreement that we should get to tuition-free all-day K and that we shouldn't raise tuition. The concern I have is that we're experiencing a tough budget this year, where part of that is having to now fund things through the budget that were previously offset, either through E&D or grant sources and things like that. And I want to make sure that we're just carefully considering not only the short-term impact, but the longer-term impact of what happens when the bill comes due for the money that was grant funded one year, and now we have to bring it back in. And it may actually work out, but I think we need to just do that analysis ourselves and then be able to bring it back to the full committee. We wanted to have this discussion tonight because I think it was good initial feedback about the direction you want us to head. What I'd like to do is be able to now put those numbers to paper, or at least to screen, and be able to come back to you with a little bit more of an analysis of that next meeting. And then, you could certainly decide next meeting what you wanted to do, or you could even wait to the 16th and do that as part of the preliminary budget vote. So we have a little bit of time that we can play this out. This is a short week between school committee meetings, because we actually meet next Thursday as well. And then we have 2 weeks, but I think this is certainly, the analysis is certainly something we could turn around for next week.
Perfect. And then the second part to this question is, by keeping tuition at $1,800 for next year, could there be potential additional cuts to staff that would impact our schools?
I think we'd have to look at that in the model and how that plays out. I think, the challenge we have is in the next round of state budgets, there's a lot of unknowns. I think the state is sitting on a fairly large surplus right now. We don't know what the next governor's going to do. I did see that they're trying to come to some agreements around revenue projections, and that it seems to be trending lower in this next iteration from what I read in the news the other day. So I don't know how that will impact the thinking around the budget. I also, I'm cautiously optimistic that, with the advent of the millionaire's tax, that could somehow impact education. It was certainly earmarked for that. But what we don't know if the legislature is going to choose to distribute that to all districts, or if they're really going to decide that that's going to be the balance of the money that would fully fund SOA, in which case we could actually see none of it. And so I think that's some of the challenge of trying to extrapolate a whole year in advance, is there's just a big unknown. Dave, is that a fair assessment?
Perfect.
All right, I think that's great. I think coming back next week with that kind of breakdown, and then if I could just ask that you add one more piece, and if it's, what is the cost of transportation for those 11 kids that are bused back home? And maybe it's negligible, but just kind of throw that in there too. It's negligible. Okay. Yeah, I think, and then, so next time we'll hear, hopefully we can come up with a number. And if we can't vote on it next time, we have to vote it by February 16th. So, okay, thank you guys.
All right, last request I would have for you in terms of budget discussions. Is there anything else? We're going to come back with all-day K next time, and we're starting to prepare, budget materials for the 16th for that budget presentation, and we'll be sending out our hold-the-date invitations to you as well as all of our, finance and select boards in both towns. Probably tomorrow that will go out. But is there any additional information around the budget that you want brought back to you for next week, in addition to the all-day K analysis? I want to make sure we're responsive to that.
What was the answer on the 100,000 ARPA dollars that we haven't received? We're not getting it?
It's because we requested it, but it was not approved.
From the town?
Correct.
Okay.
I guess I just wonder, like, if money does appear, as it did this last time, with extra, you know, wherever it comes from, like, money appears. Is there a process for, John, stop laughing at me, I see you over there, but you know what I mean, like, people retired, oh, boom, there's money there. Is there a process for restoring, like, will those things that we talked about tonight be the first things to be restored to the budget, or, like, I guess that's my question. Are those permanently lost? Is that what we're gonna end up voting on, or is there a thought process in terms of bringing any of those things back?
Dave, can you speak to that? Because there's also some legal requirements about, once we set a budget, we can't raise it, correct?
Correct.
I'm not asking you to raise the budget, but if you found.
That's it.
No, but if you start to add a lot back in after, I think that can, Dave, can you speak? I'd rather have you speak to that. You know the technical details of it more than I do.
No, I know you can't raise the budget, but like, we didn't raise the budget when you restored those positions. We found money in the budget to keep those positions, so that's what I'm asking.
Right, so.
I know we can't raise the budget, I've been doing this long enough.
So I won't respond to that. So what you're asking is, in the event that additional resources are found between 10 o'clock this Thursday and Monday, when we're going to have this presentation ready for next Thursday, I think the chances are slim. If something materializes, we would need to present. It's not that we would need to present options. We'd be able to say, we found this amount of money that's available. There's a couple of things on priority list 4 that are fair game. There's reducing the all-day K tuition. Okay. There's items on sheets 1, 2, and 3 as well. I personally don't think it's going to happen. The budget was scrubbed really briskly to get to this point. I guess, Marie, Peter, my statement would be, if we found additional resources, we wouldn't make a determination which one of those it would be addressed to. We'd present you with the information.
Can I give one other concrete
That's mostly the answer to my question, but you can.
I thought you were talking more, what if later in the year, say during the governor's budget proposal, gets released and the legislature then approves late in the year an increase to Chapter 78 that we haven't calculated in ours, what would we do with that? Right, that would be a question that I would.
That would be giving me way more credit than I deserve, because that's like a lot of extra thinking that I wasn't actually doing.
But that's why Peter's answer to that was appropriate, because if all of a sudden we had more money, but are precluded from raising the budget in equal measure, that's going to go into E&D next year.
So we basically have the opportunity until the school committee finalizes its budget and is sent to the towns to set the school committee budget. But once that's done, we've locked in our budget. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Moving on to subcommittees, community engagement. Andrew.
Thank you, Amy. On January 13th, 2023, the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District School Committee Community Engagement Subcommittee, or ABRSDSC-CESC, met to discuss tactics and activities that can be utilized to build community connections to promote the understanding of the upcoming district budget. Additionally, the ABRSDSC-CESC will collaborate and support the district's efforts to bring the community together around anti-hate speech discussions. Our next meeting will be Friday, February 3rd. Thank you.
Okay, policy, Ginny.
At our last policy meeting on the 17th of January, we continued to discuss the policy regarding charging for district facilities. And we're still grappling with that for a number of reasons that I won't go into since we're rounding past the third hour of our meeting tonight. we asked for more information from the administration, expect to get it, and we'll report back to you guys after.
Okay, so I'll do budget since Adam and Kyra couldn't be here. And I'll just say, you saw it, everything that we discussed at the budget meeting. I don't think anybody has anything to add. Yeah, okay. And negotiations, do you want to, should we be giving, it's ongoing. We're still meeting.
I would just say, you know, we really appreciate the collaborative nature of negotiations with the association. You know, we think we're making good positive progress, and we are anticipating that we will schedule an executive session at the beginning of your next meeting, but the next meeting, you don't have any guests and presentations. It's really solely a budget discussion that, and quite frankly, it will be focused pretty much on all-day kindergarten. So it's not going to be a long school committee meeting next time. So what we're planning to do as of now is schedule an executive session for 7 o'clock. Actually, we're going to do the meeting at 7. I would think we'll probably do the executive session probably by 7:45, maybe 8 o'clock. And then we anticipate maybe a 20-minute, 30-minute executive session. So we don't anticipate a 3-hour meeting for next time.
Great. Okay. Consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion and a separate vote. I will read each item, and if any member would like it held, please say hold. Members do not have to have attended a meeting to vote on the minutes. So, first one, approval of ABR-SC meeting minutes of 1/12/23. Recommendation to approve bus lease agreement and addendum. Just two. Addendum between NET Leasing Corporation and ABR-SD FY 24-25. 28. Sorry, 28. Anyone want me to read? You want me to read that again, or are you all cool? All right. So, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? That was you.
Liz moved and Tessa seconded.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? I'm trying to wrap it up. Okay. Okay, so we are moving on to statements and warrants. Tessa, my dear.
Anything to get you to turn that off. I move that the school committee vote to approve the below listed warrants totaling $3,712,107.70. Payroll vendor warrants as follows: 23-014 PR dated 1/12/2023 in the amount of $621,178.55, and payroll warrants as follows: P2314 dated 1/12/2023 in the amount of $3,090,929.15.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so Peter, anything before we adjourn?
No, I'll just say that this was a tough week to be a superintendent with the weather. I think, I'm coming out of the week, depending on your perspective, either 0 for 2 or 2 for 2. I think it's probably more like 0 for 2. So, my apologies to students, families, staff. I think, I wish personally went a little smoother. I guess getting up at 3 a.m. doesn't do too much for it. But we will continue to work on that. And hopefully we get forecasts that pan out the way they're forecasted.
It's kind of a no-win situation there. Okay.
Move to adjourn.
Seconded.
So that was Tessa and then Ben. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Thank you. Good night.